The street turns into total chaos as a guy points into the air and tells everyone to look up, while people start losing it and running for their lives. Someone yells that they're all gonna die if they don't get out of there right now, just as a girl stands there casually snacking. She looks at the sky and mentions that something really big is heading their way, and then a massive stone tower starts falling apart, with huge chunks of rock crashing down toward the town below. Down on the ground, a guy desperately tells everyone to put up a barrier. Another guy yells back that a shield isn't gonna do anything against this, and he's right. The honeycomb barrier starts cracking immediately, and someone screams that it's already breaking. Rubble rains down everywhere, but a girl in a black coat crouches low to protect a small kitten from the falling rock. Suddenly, a new light appears, and the townspeople look up in total shock, asking what that massive barrier is. Watching the new shield hold strong, a guy says that only one person is capable of pulling off magic like that, so he identifies the spell as Sealed Raylith. The person next to him is stunned, wondering if that means the royal magician is actually there. The crowd starts turning on the girl, with one guy with a goatee yelling at her to stop worrying about a cat and start saving actual people, and the rest of the mob shouts along, totally agreeing with him. The royal magician just looks over her shoulder, completely calm, and asks what they're even talking about, since she points out that she's already saved them. High above their heads, her massive honeycomb shield is easily holding back the weight of the crumbling stone tower, keeping everyone safe. Seeing the name Shield Raylith triggers a memory of a fancy party where a guy with the same name is celebrating his engagement. Guests are crowding around clapping and offering their congratulations to him. Shield looks like a completely different person back then, waving and thanking everyone for showing up to the event, while he leans in with a huge grin to check on his fiancée Elaine. He asks her what's on her mind, and Elaine looks back at him with a soft smile, saying she thinks today is going to be a lot of fun. She looks absolutely stunning in her dress, and the whole crowd starts losing it over how beautiful she is. Shield just stands there looking totally dazed, agreeing with everyone that she's gorgeous, and then he gets all hyped up and makes a goofy face, shouting out to the whole room that from this moment on, he's officially Shield Raylith. Back in the present, the soldiers on the ground are just standing there looking confused. They can't even process what's happening with the tower or the girl. Everything goes south fast as soldiers move in and surround Shield and Elaine right in the middle of their party, and someone in the crowd yells out in total shock while a soldier steps forward, asking what the hell is even happening. The Knight Commander steps up and addresses Shield Raylith, telling him he's being kicked out of the country for plotting to take over the government. Shield can't even believe it. He just stands there looking at the commander in shock. Shield starts losing it, saying he never did any of that, and that if they just check the facts, they'll see it's a mistake. But the commander just throws a stack of papers down, saying they already finished the investigation and found the evidence right at Shield's place. Shield repeats the words like he's in a daze, but then Elaine speaks up, apologizing out of nowhere. Shield looks over at his fiancée, totally confused, and asks her why she's saying sorry. Elaine keeps her head down, telling him she's sorry for sneaking into his room while he wasn't there. She says she was just worried about what he was doing every night. But that's when she found the evidence. Shield is sweating and looks completely betrayed, shouting at her to tell him what she's even talking about. But Elaine just hides her face and starts crying like a victim. The commander stands there with a smug grin, watching the whole thing go down exactly how he wanted. Shield is sweating bullets as the realization hits him. He starts wondering if the whole thing was a setup, and why he's the one getting screwed over. He thinks back to all the times his barrier magic was the only thing standing between this kingdom and a literal army of monsters, but none of that seems to matter now. Shield calls the whole exile thing a joke and asks if the king is actually behind this, and the commander confirms that everyone is in on the plan. Hearing that the king is involved changes everything for Shield. He realizes there's officially no place left for him in this country, so he stops arguing and just starts heading for the exit. He walks right past the guards while everyone in the room just stands there watching him go. Shield actually cracks a bit of a smile and looks back, asking if this means he's not getting any severance pay for his years of service. But the commander isn't laughing. He just stares Shield down and asks if he really thinks now is a good time to be making jokes, leading Shield to just laugh it off. He agrees it's a bad time, gives a casual wave over his shoulder, and tells them all goodbye as he walks out the door. It's not long before he's loaded up and the carriage wheels start turning. He's officially being kicked out of the only home he knows, and as he looks out the window, a single tear falls. He just can't wrap his head around why any of this is happening when he never did anything to deserve it. Shield looks back and admits he was basically living like a total party animal. He realized way too late that he was completely wide open when it came to politics, and it didn't help that he was suddenly super popular, getting marriage offers from all kinds of noble girls lately, but the realization finally hits him like a truck. He spent years accidentally making enemies and giving people reasons to hate his guts. He remembers the engagement party where he was happily bragging to everyone about how he was marrying a total beauty, and just then, he He recalls a specific girl in the crowd who was giving him a terrifying look. He still has no clue why she was so mad, leaving Shield sitting in the carriage, trying to convince himself that he didn't do anything wrong. He feels like he's lived his life as best as he possibly could. He thinks back to when he was just a kid, making sure to keep practicing even when the other kids made fun of him for only having low-level magic. Since barriers were all he had, he just kept working on them, and he spent every single day perfecting his technique. And he never stopped training until his magic was on a whole different level from everyone else. Shield stands there looking pretty proud of himself. After all that training, people started calling him the best barrier user in the whole kingdom, and he's the one who put up the massive magic dome protecting the entire capital. But there's a catch. That magic isn't actually permanent. Looking out the window at the city he left behind, Shield wonders if the guys who kicked him out even have a backup plan. But as the carriage keeps moving further away, he realizes that the barrier is definitely going to reach its limit sooner or later. He stops to think, trying to remember if he ever actually explained that the spell would wear off, and he starts breaking into a cold sweat. He realizes he probably forgot to tell them, but he just laughs it off and decides it's not his problem anymore. After picking up some supplies at a local market, he checks his stash and realizes he's down to just a little bit of money and his gold pocket watch. So he looks at his options and decides the southern port is the best spot for a fresh start, since the other directions are either full of dragons, beastmen, or just lead back home. But before he leaves, he hits up a tavern because he's starving. He's looking way happier now, holding up his drink and a huge piece of meat while taking a big bite, thinking to himself that maybe getting kicked out of the capital wasn't such a bad deal after all. Shield finishes up his meal and says it was actually pretty good, but he's not alone. A few guys in hoods are watching him from the bar. He looks satisfied with the food and stands up, knocking his chair back a bit as he gets ready to head out and tells the lady at the tavern thanks for the meal while waving goodbye, leaving her smiling as he walks out the door. As he moves down the street, those three hooded guys from before start tailing him, following him right into a quiet alleyway where Shield finally stops and asks if they need something, since they've been staring at him for a while now. The guys don't waste any time and start pulling out daggers, telling Shield he's about to die and not to take it personally. But Shield just looks at them and figures they aren't going to tell him who sent them, which the lead guy pretty much confirmed. Suddenly, the two assassins lunge forward and swing their blades with everything they've got, trying to cut him down, but Shield just holds up his hand like it's nothing, noting that their movements definitely prove they're part of the Night Order before he calmly says the word barrier, and a glowing magic shield pops up instantly to block their blades. Shield stands his ground as the barrier's power just shatters their swords into tiny pieces. It's a total weapon wreck, and he looks at them with a smirk, saying he's sorry but he's actually a total specialist when it comes to barrier magic. The lead assassin doesn't look bothered and says they expected that much, then asks how he's going to handle debuff magic. Before Shield can even move, he realizes the spell is already going off. Rocks and debris start falling all around him, while the ground literally starts cracking under his feet, making him realize they're hitting him with heavy gravity. Shield just stands there looking bored and says he feels bad they went through all that trouble for nothing, but he lets his power loose. The whole spell gets flipped around in a massive flash of energy that slams the assassins right into the pavement, using their own magic reflection to pin them down like it's nothing. Shield stands over them with his arms crossed, telling them he can't actually use normal defensive barriers, which is how he became a royal magician. One of the guys can barely move his hand as it shakes on the ground, just saying he was told the dude was a basic barrier user. Shield looks down at the guys and says he has a good guess, but asks who hired them anyway. The leader just grovels on the dirt and says he isn't talking, but Shield points out that since he reflected their spell, he's the one in control now. He tells them they'll be pinned there forever unless he lets go, asking if they're really cool with that. He decides it doesn't matter since it's obviously the Knight Commander's doing. He starts walking away but stops to ask if there are more guys like them on the way. The assassin admits that since they failed, more hitters are definitely coming. He says the boss wants Shield dead so he can never try to get his old life back, which Shield just shrugs off with a casual "got it." He snaps his fingers to break the gravity spell, and the lead assassin looks totally confused, asking if he's really just going to let them walk away like that. Shield tells them defense is his only specialty, but he can take them on whenever. He says their attacks wouldn't touch him even if they tried for 100 years. The guy just stares at the ground, completely crushed. He realizes they never had a chance and wonders if this insane power is what it means to be a royal magician. Shield gives them a lazy wave and tells them see ya as the three of them finally tuck tail and disappear into the night, leaving Shield standing there alone. He looks ahead with a serious face, saying well then, as he figures out his next move. Shield stands there thinking about how staying in the country isn't an option anymore. He's totally out of ways to hide, so he starts weighing his options. South is usually the safest move, but the knights are probably waiting there, and the north is likely just as bad. He looks pretty focused as he realizes there's only one path left, the east. He really didn't want to go that way because of the rumors about all the gross bugs, but he doesn't have a choice. Shield starts running, yelling at the Knight Commander to watch out. He's so annoyed that he promises to come back and kill the guy if even one bug lands on him. He stops for a second and feels relieved that it's clear, but he doesn't notice the massive, creepy caterpillar sitting right on his shoulder. Suddenly, giant monster versions of bugs show up everywhere surrounding him. Shield completely loses it and starts screaming his head off because of the gross out factor. Just then, a massive dragon appears right in front of him. Shield just looks up and lets out a tiny "oh," and then he actually starts smiling. He looks totally relieved and says it's just a dragon, like that's way better than dealing with the bug. Shield just waves the dragon off like it's no big deal and says they should just get moving. The dragon thinks it's pretty wild that a human is actually ignoring him, while Shield's head just spins from all the chaos. The dragon isn't having it though, so he leans in close and tells Shield to pay attention and look right here. Shield finally notices the dragon is talking and gets surprised that it can speak human. He looks the beast up and down and asks if he's supposed to be some kind of big deal, and the dragon explains that he's Bahamut, part of the strongest race out there. He thinks Shield is a total riot for having no idea who he is. Things take a dark turn when the dragon's eye narrows. He says he's actually interested now and decides he's going to eat Shield himself. Shield starts sweating a bit and asks the guide to just give him a break, but the massive dragon doesn't listen and lunges forward, snapping its giant jaws down to swallow him whole. Shield doesn't even flinch. He just puts his hand up and drops a barrier. It's got a physical reflection effect that sends the dragon's head flying back the second it hits, causing a huge shockwave that rips through the trees. Shield stays perfectly still while the dragon just stands there trying to process what happened. The dragon looks completely stunned, unable to believe that his own attack actually got repelled by a human. Shield just looks over at the dragon with a totally calm face and mentions that he only used a barrier to knock the attack back. Bahamut's claws dig deep into the ground as he skids backward, completely losing his mind over how this is even happening. The force is so much that the massive dragon gets launched straight up into the air like a toy, and as he falls, he stares down at the top of Shield's head, trying to figure out what kind of monster he just ran into. Shield doesn't move an inch while keeping his hand up, letting his physical reflection barrier do all the heavy lifting for him. He shields his eyes from the sun to watch the dragon tumble away and casually remarks that the guy really went the distance. Then he looks around at all the smashed trees and rock, figuring a spear or some other weapon must have caused all this mess. Bahamut is fuming now, grit his teeth and wondering why on earth a regular human's magic is actually holding him back. Shield just gives him a look and says barriers aren't exactly supposed to be things you can just break through, leading to the dragon totally freaking out, asking how a simple, basic spell could ever be powerful enough to stop someone like him. Shield just smiles and mentions he spent 10 years practicing nothing but barrier magic every single day. He really put in the work, and now the dragon is starting to realize things aren't going his way. The dragon loses it, yelling that this is impossible while charging up another massive blast, searching for any kind of opening to break through. Shield doesn't even flinch, keeping his hand up to trigger his physical reflection barrier. The dragon's beam hits the wall and just starts splitting apart, making Shield think about how it's always a good idea to have his defenses set up way before the fight even starts. The dragon pours every bit of power he has into the attack, but it just explodes against the shield like it's hitting a brick wall. Shield takes a close look at the energy and notes that while it looks like a light beam, it actually feels more like molten magma, so he decides to switch things up, figuring if that's the case, he's got a better way to handle it. He stands his ground inside the hex pattern dome and activates his magic reflection barrier, sending the entire attack right back where it came from, catching the dragon in a massive blast that sends him flying. Bahamut ends up flat on the ground in a cloud of smoke, still unable to believe a regular human just wrecked him like that. Shield watches the smoke clear, thinking to himself that even the top-tier dragon species is actually pretty fragile when he looks down at his hand and realizes that maybe his own power is just way more insane than he thought. He decides to move out, figuring he might as well use the massive path the dragon just carved through the mountain. Thick black smoke and dust still hang heavy over the area where the dragon crashed down, making Shield think about how magic like that is honestly more of a natural disaster than an actual spell, and, as he looks at the wreckage, he realizes that if he was reflecting that much energy, it's no wonder the dragon got wrecked. Suddenly, a hand reaches out from the rubble with a grunt, as if someone is struggling to stand up. A girl with horns and messy hair emerges from the dust, looking right at Shield and calling out to him. She laughs with a sharp grin, telling him he really did a number on her a few minutes ago. Shield completely loses it, and asks who the heck she is, only for her to casually drop the news that she's actually Bahamut. Bahamut looks down at her new body, mentioning it's been a long time since she was a human, but this form should do. Shield can't believe his eyes and shouts, asking if this small girl is actually that massive dragon from before. She casually confirms it, explaining that she just used a bit of magic to shift into this human shape. Shield turns red and covers his eyes, yelling at her to at least put some clothes on before they keep talking. Bahamut realizes humans are apparently sensitive about that stuff, so she figures she might as well play along. She gives her fingers a quick snap, and a flash of magic surrounds her. A fancy dress appears out of nowhere, leaving Shield looking pretty impressed by the transformation. Shield complains that she's still showing too much skin for a forest, but she tells him to stop being so demanding. She decides she's going to follow him since he's the first person she couldn't eat, and he just gives a tired reply. Shield asks if she even knows where they're going, and she puffs out her chest, saying it's obvious. Shield waves for her to follow, telling the dragon girl to come along since he was starting to get bored on his own. Bahamut lets out a sharp grin, telling him to go on ahead because she needs to prepare something. Shield looks back with a confused expression, sensing something is a bit off with her. Suddenly, Bahamut lunges at him with her claws out, laughing about how he's way too late to react and shouldn't have let his guard down. She tries to sink her fangs into his shoulder, but instead of a bite, there's a loud snap as her tooth breaks right off. Shield just stands there looking smug while Bahamut shakes with tears in her eyes, so he explains that he actually has an invisible barrier up all the time. Bahamut screams at the top of her lungs in frustration while Shield casually mentions the barrier reflects any physical hits, leaving the dragon girl looking completely defeated and teary-eyed as Shield tells her it's time to move, getting a really weak response back. As they walk through the woods together, Shield mentions he's starting to get pretty hungry, but Bahamut just stays quiet and annoyed, until she notices him drifting off and points out he's going the wrong way, which makes Shield realize he'd be lost without her. Shield stares her down and tells her that if she knows the path so well, she should be the one leading the way, but he keeps walking in front anyway, muttering about how there is no way he's letting himself get eaten while Bahamut creeps along behind him. He looks into their supplies and asks if they're actually getting close to a town, and she promises him they are. Shield keeps staring at the last of their food, worried that if she's lying, they're going to be completely out of luck once the rations hit zero. Bahamut just gives him a look and reminds him they're low because he ate a whole week of food in one sitting, though he claims he didn't even enjoy it. She gets a huge grin and starts drooling, acting like human food is just a weird hobby, and that drinking blood is way better than any soup, which makes Shield look totally done with her, telling her she shouldn't talk big while she's literally covered in spit. As they keep hiking down the trail, Shield mentions that her name is kind of a lot to say and asks if she has a shorter one. Bahamut thinks back and mentions that a few hundred years ago, some people used to call her Faye. Shield likes the sound of that and says he'll just use that name from now on, and she tells him to do whatever he wants. Shield asks Faye why she or other dragons don't just attack town, and she casually tells him it's because humans taste gross and that they always try to get revenge, which makes the whole thing a giant pain. Shield just nods along as they keep walking, until Faye tells him to pick up the pace because she's dying for a breath, but Shield has to yell at her for heading the wrong way. She just laughs it off and says she was totally joking, while a tiny monster hides behind a tree nearby, leaving Shield to wonder why no other monsters or dragons are showing up. He starts thinking this might be her actual dragon power, realizing that even though she's a bit of a handful, Faye is actually turning out to be pretty useful for their trip. The only problem is she has no boundaries and stares at him while he's trying to use the bathroom, making him completely lose his cool. He gives her a long stare, and when she asks what his deal is, he just drops it and says it's nothing. Shield suddenly spots something through the trees and asks if that's a town up ahead, which gets Faye excited since they've finally arrived at the town of Again, seeing the busy streets and people everywhere for the first time in a while. The market in the town of Again is full of life. People are laughing and kids are running around everywhere. Faye is hyped because the place is just as busy as the rumors said, but Shield is way more focused on his stomach. He tells her he gets it, but she needs to find him some food fast because he's starving, and he can't help but shout about how great the town is. He's already planning to take on adventure jobs so he can finally live the good life, completely set on the idea that this is where his second life is really going to begin. But things don't stay pretty for long because they end up in a cave where Shield tries to whack a slime with a stick. The wood just snaps in his hand, and he realizes he's doing absolutely zero damage to the monster, which Faye finds hilarious. She starts mocking him, asking how he could possibly beat a dragon like her but struggle with a total weakling like this. Shield doesn't even try to argue and just yells that she's right. He's weak and can't do anything besides barrier magic. He snaps back at her, telling her that if she's such a big, powerful dragon, she should just step up and do the fighting herself instead of complaining. Faye just looks away and tells him she can't, because the second any of these monsters see her, they just get scared and run off. She doesn't stop there though and keeps digging at him, calling him weak, clueless, and making fun of how bad he is at even basic stuff like gathering herd. Faye stands over him and mocks him for not even being able to beat a weakling, while Shield stays on the ground thinking his second life is already over. But then he spots something on the table and reaches out for a silver pocket watch and some fancy clothes. He looks like he just won the lottery, shouting that he finally found the ultimate item to turn things around. Later on, a bearded noble named Margrave Albert welcomes them to his estate, greeting Shield and Faye with a huge smile, and Shield plays along perfectly, thanking the Margrave for the invitation while Faye just watches him work the room. The Margrave says it's an honor to have a royal magician as a tutor for his daughter, which makes Shield start sweating bullets as he's told to take care of the girl. Faye notices he's acting weird, but Shield just whispers that his conscience is killing him even though he has to do this to survive, and while he holds his royal watch, he worries because Faye heard the daughter is a genius, and all he actually knows is barrier magic. Faye asks him what the plan is if the girl wants to learn actual spells he doesn't know, leaving Shield looking pretty stressed out, especially since Faye won't stop staring at him while he's trying to think. Margrave Albert gestures toward a massive spread of food and tells them to help themselves. Shield just stands there looking completely blank, while his conscience literally waves goodbye and flies out of his head. He doesn't say a word at first, just quietly calls out to Faye, before snapping and telling her to eat every single thing on the table until they're both dead. Faye just shrugs it off, saying she was gonna eat anyway, and that this is exactly why she follows him. She doesn't waste any time, grabbing a huge turkey leg and just going to town on it. Shield is right there with her, picking up a giant bowl and chugging the whole thing while the Margrave laughs about what a huge appetite he had. While they're stuffing their faces, the Margrave tries to change the subject to talk about his daughter, but Shield just shoves an empty plate in his face and yells for seconds because the food is so good, leaving the old man sweating and calling for more. Shield's inner monologue is racing. He knows he can't worry about being polite right now, so he figures his only move is to just keep eating. As Faye continues to wreck the buffet, a young girl shows up in the doorway behind them, giving off a seriously dark vibe. Amelia stands there giving them a cold, heavy stare while Shield starts sweating, realizing her magic power is totally off the chart. He wonders if she's the genius everyone talks about. Because her energy is so high, he honestly has nothing he can even teach her. It's a pretty bad spot to be in, and Shield knows he's in deep trouble, so his brilliant plan is to just keep chugging food and drinks as fast as he can before he inevitably gets fired. They all move to the lounge to sit down, and Shield is pretty much just waiting for the hammer to drop. Albert starts off by introducing Shield and Faye to his daughter, telling her they'll be her new tutors starting today. He goes on to hype them up, telling Amelia she should be thrilled because they're actually former court mages from the kingdom. The old man keeps laying it on thick, saying they came all this way just to help her magic get better, and Shield can only sit there looking nervous while a teacup is placed down on the table with a quiet clink. Amelia does a total 180 and puts on this perfect, sweet smile, telling her dad she's so touched by his help that she's almost in tears. Albert is all smiles, telling his daughter he's glad she's happy and that she needs to learn everything she can from her new tutor. He waves goodbye while heading out the door, and Amelia plays the part perfectly, giving him a sweet yes as he leaves them alone. Shield tries to keep things professional and tells her it's a pleasure to meet her, but the vibe in the room changes instantly. Amelia drops the sweet daughter act the second the door closes and demands to know who they actually are. She tells them that if they're honest right now, she'll just kick them out of the house without making things painful. Shield is totally caught off guard and stammers, asking her what she could possibly mean by all that, but she isn't buying it, pointing out that their whole court mages from Helena's story is obviously just a cover since his gold watch looks legit. Shield can only let out a stressed groan while she's pressing him, asking if he just found that watch or bought it somewhere. She takes a sip of her tea and explains that while her dad is too nice and would just blame himself for getting scammed, she isn't like that. Amelia lays it all out one last time, telling them they better start talking if they don't want to find out what happens when she stops being nice. Shield looks down with a cold sweat. He starts realizing she might have already seen through his whole act. Amelia points out the massive magic dome visible from the garden, asking if they can see the giant barrier covering Helena, and she explains that even if it wasn't visible, that holy barrier is famous as common knowledge across the entire continent. Shield starts blushing and scratches the back of his head, telling her that hearing her talk about it like that is making him feel a little shy. Amelia asks why he's the one acting embarrassed, so Shield just tells her straight up that he's actually the person who made that barrier. The room goes quiet while Amelia just stares at her teacup and lets out a long annoyed sigh. She explains that the royal magicians are the elite at the top of millions of people, and she gets so mad she literally crushes her cup. Amelia tells him to stop using that name so lightly since the mage who built that barrier is a legend even in her country and happens to be her idol. She glares at him with total hatred and warns him that if he tries to claim that identity casually again, she'll make him regret it. Amelia finishes by saying she's going to be a royal magician herself one day, so she has zero time to waste on a couple of scammers. Shield starts getting a weird feeling. He realizes the magic aura coming off Amelia is just like the other royal magicians he knows, so he tries one more time to convince her, reminding her that he really is one of those 10 famous mages. Amelia just sighs and asks if he's still trying to lie, wondering why a top-tier magician would be living such a broke and struggling life. Shield explains that his barrier was actually too powerful, and it sounds like he got kicked out because he was just getting in the way of politics. But Amelia isn't buying it at all, telling him he's a bad liar since no country would be dumb enough to exile a national hero. Shield starts losing it and yells that she's totally right, even if it doesn't change the fact that they still dumped him. Amelia gets fed up and starts walking away. She tells him he's just annoying her now and needs to get out of her sight. Shield shouts after her that he can't just leave since he's actually here for a job, but she keeps moving, so he looks over at Bahamut and begs her to jump in and say something to help him explain the situation. Bahamut just looks annoyed and asks why she's the one who has to talk sense into such a stubborn little girl. Shield is completely stunned and shouts after her. He can't believe she's acting like this after she sat there and ate all that food. Amelia ignores him and pulls on her training glove, telling him there's no way she's taking lessons from him. She tells him to just stay in the corner and keep quiet so she can practice, and all Shield can do is give a weak reply. Since there's no talking sense into her right now, Shield decides he'll just hang back and watch her train. It's not like he has anything better to do anyway. They head out to a big open courtyard behind the mansion where the training gear is set up, and Shield notices the stone magic doll standing in the center. He's actually pretty surprised because he's never seen a practice dummy look so beat up and worn out. Watching her get ready, he starts to realize that she isn't just playing around. She's actually dead serious about becoming a royal magician. Amelia holds out her hand, and a ball of flame starts to form, making Shield wonder if she's just going to stick with fire magic, but she suddenly calls up a whole bunch of different magic circles at once. Shield is totally caught off guard seeing her use fire, water, and wind all at the same time as she gets ready to fire. She lets loose a massive blast of elemental energy that tears across the training ground and immediately follows it up by casting a reinforcement buff on her own body to keep the pressure on. Shield is totally floored seeing her go all out. He can't believe she's using high-level enchantment magic on top of everything else, and Amelia doesn't slow down for a second. She moves in a blur, her speed boosted as she lets off a massive wave of energy that slams right into the practice stall. Sharp blades of mana tear through the air and slice into the stone dummy. Amelia just stands there with her eyes closed, looking completely focused as Shield watches her with a serious look. He realizes that the way she swaps between different elements so easily puts her on the same level as the top royal magician. Even after that huge display, Amelia isn't satisfied. She charges up another ball of energy in her hand, telling herself she still needs a lot more practice. Shield starts clapping and tells her she was actually incredible, but Amelia is too wiped out to care. She just stands there catching her breath. She's clearly not in the mood for compliments and tells him to just be quiet and stop talking to her. Shield looks at the cracked, broken head of the training dummy. He tells her that seeing it this beat up just proves she spent all her time fighting dolls instead of real people. He points out that she's seriously lacking real combat experience, so he tells her to bring it. He's decided to personally beat some real-world skills into her. Amelia looks at him like he's crazy and asks if a scammer like him could even handle it. She mentions that every other tutor she's had ended up running away once it was time for actual combat. Shield gets a smug look on his face and tells Amelia he's going to show her exactly what a royal magician is capable of, but Amelia isn't backing down at all. He points right at him and says she's used enough magic for now. She doesn't want to accidentally kill him, so she challenges him to a physical fight, which leaves Shield totally caught off guard. He keeps the pressure on, saying anyone trying to be a top-tier mage should at least know some basic martial art. Shield says he knows a bit, but he looks way less confident than he was a second ago as he starts sweating, secretly asking Faye if she can just handle the hand-to-hand stuff for him. Bahamut is just chilling on the grass, totally unbothered. She tells him the food at this place is too good to pass up, and killing the girl now would just ruin their meal ticket, so she gives him a little smirk. She asks him if there's really any way he'd actually lose a fight to a little girl like her. Shield takes a second to process that, and finally gives in, telling her he understands. Amelia doesn't waste any time and lunges at him. Shield focuses everything he's got on, just trying to keep up with her insane speed, as she throws a high kick, and Shield barely dodges the strike. Someone lets out a quick grunt as the intensity of the sparring match starts to pick up. Shield is standing there thinking about how his constant barrier is doing its job, while Amelia is on the ground totally losing it over how his bones feel like solid rock. Basically, she grunts in frustration while trying to pull herself together. Shield just gives a nervous laugh, knowing he's kind of cheating with the magic. But Amelia isn't done yet. She gets this super intense look in her eyes and yells out that they're going for another round. She lunges back in, and Shield panics for a second, realizing she's aiming a massive strike straight for his face. He tries to block, but then he realizes she totally played him with a feint. Amelia lets out a sharp cry as she lands a hit, but it's pretty clear she's the one who got hurt. She ends up curled on the grass, clutching her hand. Shield looks down at her and casually mentions his stomach isn't even that hard. But Amelia is fuming. She looks at him with tears in her eyes and asks if he's some kind of freak who eats iron every day just to get that tough. Shield just smiles, feeling a lot better about things. He asks her if he can have the win, noting that since she couldn't take him down, she definitely can't fire him anymore. Amelia finally sighs and tells him he can stay. She figures if he's really this durable, he might be the only one who won't actually die when she uses her magic. Shield is pumped and tells Fi it looks like they get to stay, while Bahamut just tells him to do whatever he wants. As Shield gives a big thumbs up and tells Amelia they'll be looking after her starting tomorrow, but she just calls him a loud scammer and mutters under her breath that she's going to find a way to kick him out soon enough, though Shield is way too distracted by the thought of another all-you-can-eat dinner to notice her walking away. The next morning starts with a total panic when someone yells out that Amelia has suddenly collapsed, so Shield and a maid go sprinting through the halls, with Shield insisting he has to see her because looking after her is his job. He slams the bedroom doors open and yells her name, only to find Amelia looking completely wiped out and stuck in bed. Shield reaches out to check her forehead and realizes she's running an insane fever, but it gets worse when he sees her arm is covered in bruises, making him worry she might actually have a broken bone. Shield looks at her and says it can't be helped, so he asks if he should be the one to treat her while Amelia tries to say something, but he just tells everyone to leave it to him because he's a royal magician from the Helena Kingdom. Bahamut shows up at the door and asks if she should help out, but Shield just tells her he's got this since he's the tutor here. He takes a second to catch his breath and focus, and then starts using his magic to heal Amelia's injuries right there on the spot. A bit later, someone knocks on the door while Bahamut is busy eating, making Shield wonder who it could be. Amelia walks in and asks if she can have a moment of his time, which really surprises Shield, who tells her he's just glad to see she's feeling better already. She looks right at him and says she heard he was the one who fixed her up. Amelia looks at her arm and realizes that since the healing is this perfect, Shield can't just be some random fraud, though she still thinks he's hiding something and mentions how it's still pretty hard to believe he was actually a royal magician. Shield just shrugs it off and says she might be right about that, so Amelia decides she's going to give him one more chance to prove himself. She looks him right in the eye and challenges him, saying she'll take him on using the magic he's so proud of. She tells him to come outside right this second, even though someone in the back is complaining that dinner isn't even ready yet. They head out to the front of the mansion where Amelia lays out the rules. They keep going until one of them gives up, but otherwise anything goes. Shield is totally down for it, and says he'll use the chance to hammer all the knowledge he's picked up in real fights into her. Amelia summons a magical weapon, and warns him not to regret this even if he dies, which just makes Shield laugh because she's using a basic fire arrow. He can't believe how much she's underestimating. Amelia just stands there completely shocked by his reaction. Amelia doesn't hold back and lets loose a massive circle of magic spears that fly everywhere. She smiles and says he should at least be able to handle a little combo like this, but Shield is actually pretty impressed. He realizes it didn't even take her 3 seconds to fire that off. He decides to just play along for a bit so he doesn't end up getting hurt, and casually puts up a barrier, using his magic absorption to stop every single spear in its track. The spears just shatter into nothing against his defense. It's like they aren't even hitting anything. Amelia completely loses it and asks what the hell is going on. She demands to know what kind of magic he's even using. She gets even more frustrated and says if that's how he wants to play, then she's got something else for him. A massive shadow drops over Shield as she summons something huge right on top of him, but she's still gritting her teeth and gathering more liquid magic in her hand. She's definitely not done yet. Shield stands right in the middle of a massive liquid explosion. The water crashes down everywhere, and he casually mentions how intense this is getting. He smiles and says her attacks would be a problem if they hit, but then activates his magic absorption, soaking up all that energy while telling her thanks for the meal with a smug look. He asks Amelia what her next move is as a light drizzle starts to fall on the field. Looking up at the sky, he's a bit confused why it's suddenly starting to rain. He starts shivering and asks if this is just some annoying prank since it's getting freezing cold. The truth is that Amelia has just switched things up and started using ice magic. Shield realizes it too late as he looks down and sees his feet are already frozen to the ground. Amelia reaches out and yells for the ice to gather, calling out her ice break attack as sharp icicles surround him. Amelia leans in with a wild look in her eyes, telling S.H.I.E.L.D. he should just give up already. But S.H.I.E.L.D. just starts laughing like crazy, shouting her name as the ice shards fly past. He's actually impressed, telling her she's a total genius and has an insane natural feel for magic. He raises his hand as hexagonal patterns start to glow, mentioning that even though she's good, he's sorry to break it to her, but his barrier is completely freeform and can change however he wants. Amelia just stands there with her mouth open, totally stunned that he blocked everything so easily. She screams that his magic is basically cheating, while S.H.I.E.L.D. just laughs and asks what her next move is, but it looks like she's done, as her ice magic fades away and she leans on a dummy, completely out of breath. S.H.I.E.L.D. jokes about barely surviving that one, so Amelia yells at him to finally explain what kind of magic he's using, and S.H.I.E.L.D. gets real smug, saying he'll tell her the secret, but only if she starts calling him teacher. Amelia is completely spent from the fight, looking down with tired eyes, but she finally gives in, yelling out teacher with everything she's got left. She asks what that magic was, but S.H.I.E.L.D. just grins and tells her to say it again, which backfires immediately as she threatens to kill him, making him apologize. He finally gets serious and explains that barrier magic is literally the only thing he can actually do, which makes Amelia's head spin as she tries to process. He stands tall and tells her that despite only having one skill, he made it all the way to the top as a royal magician, leaving her totally stunned and spiraling as she connects the dots that he's one of the legendary 10 mages. She grabs his face and screams that it makes no sense for a hero like him to be exiled. S.H.I.E.L.D. tells her he's being for real, but Amelia's brain just breaks. She stands there screaming with her face totally distorted as the news sinks in, and she looks at him like she's seeing a ghost, asking if he's actually the legendary Lord S.H.I.E.L.D. He just scratches his head and gives a really awkward laugh, confirming that's the case. The realization is too much for her, so she takes off running toward the mansion while screaming at the top of her lungs, leaving S.H.I.E.L.D. just standing there confused by the drama. A bit later, S.H.I.E.L.D. and Bahamut are sitting at this massive table loaded with a crazy amount of food. Bahamut is busy stuffing her face with bread, but she looks over and asks S.H.I.E.L.D. if he sees what's happening, because Amelia is just creeping by the door. S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't even look back, saying he's just ignoring her because she's honestly giving him the creeps. Amelia finally works up the nerve to come over, putting on her best perfect daughter face with big sparkly eyes as she asks one more time if he's really Lord S.H.I.E.L.D. S.H.I.E.L.D. is totally over it by now and snaps at her, saying that's literally what he's been telling her since the moment they met. The shame hits her instantly. She moves so fast it catches S.H.I.E.L.D. off guard as she slams her head onto the table in total defeat. She starts crying right there at the feast, blaming him for not being clearer from the start because she's horrified by how rude she's been to someone so famous. Amelia is a total mess, crying while she insists her earlier perfect act wasn't the real her, but S.H.I.E.L.D. just laughs and tells her that her current freakout is definitely more natural. She can't stop wailing about how rude she was, especially since he's actually here to be her tutor, and she goes on this big rant about how he's been her idol forever, and he's the one person she respects most out of all the royal magicians. She's honestly just mortified by how she acted. Amelia tries to scramble away in shame, but a hand reaches out and grabs her by the back of the collar to keep her from bolting. S.H.I.E.L.D. tells her to just drop it and come eat with them. She eventually gives in, hiding her face in her hands while she sniffles out an answer. The dinner table is incredibly awkward now, with S.H.I.E.L.D. just wanting to eat in peace while Amelia steals embarrassed glances at him, though Bahamut is totally fine, just crushing another sandwich. Amelia finally speaks up and asks what the deal is between him and the girl with the horns, wondering what kind of relationship they actually have. S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't even make it a big deal, casually mentioning that she's a dragon who just started following him after he beat her in a fight. Amelia just stares at her, her voice trailing off as she tries to process the fact that she's sitting next to a literal dragon, and her brain completely short-circuits as the realization finally hits her. Bahamut introduces herself as the strongest dragon and tells Amelia nice to meet her. Amelia is visibly shaking, trying to accept it just because S.H.I.E.L.D. said so, but suddenly Bahamut gets this serious look in her eyes and mentions she just remembered something she totally forgot about earlier. S.H.I.E.L.D. looks over, wondering what she's talking about, so Bahamut explains that the Dragon Forest never got a new boss after she left. If they don't fix that, a bunch of dragons might start attacking human town. S.H.I.E.L.D. realizes how bad that sounds, and since he's the one who took her away from her post, he decides he has to be the one to go back and clean up the mess. Bahamut agrees to head back to pick a new leader before they continue their journey, but Amelia starts panicking, yelling that they absolutely shouldn't go picking fights with dragons. Both S.H.I.E.L.D. and Bahamut just look at her blankly and ask why she's making such a big deal out of it. Amelia is practically losing it. explaining that dragons are walking disasters that could trigger a world-ending war if things go south. Yet Shield and Bahamut just shrug it off with silly faces. They're both convinced everything is going to be just fine. Shield leads the way, shouting for everyone to get a move on since today's training involves fighting a dragon. Amelia follows behind, screaming at him to stop saying such insane things. Just as they step into the trees, a massive, scaly dragon appears right in front of them, leaving the group standing there in a bit of a shock. Amelia is practically losing her mind, yelling that she knew this would happen since they already bumped into one right at the forest entrance. While Shield turns to Bahamut and asks if dragons just enjoy showing up like this, she just looks back and tells him there's no way that's true. Bahamut stares the beast down and identifies it as the black dragon Nidhogg, while the creature just snarls back at her with a mean look in its eye. The dragon asks if she's the one who took over as the boss. Bahamut tells him she's just there to make sure he doesn't mess with humans, mostly because war is such a huge drag. The dragon doesn't seem to care, growling that if she isn't planning on stopping her business there, then it's going to be a fight. Bahamut raises her hand to get ready as the dragon lets out a deafening roar that shakes the whole forest. Amelia is completely frozen with fear, so Shield looks down at her and asks if they should just let Faye take care of this one. Shield ends up holding a terrified Amelia as she clings to him for dear life. He admits he originally wanted her to fight, but that's obviously not going to work out. Nidhogg lets out a massive roar that echoes through the whole area. Amelia is losing it, yelling that fighting something like that is impossible for a human. Shield just walks along and tells her that if she wants to be a court mage, she needs to be ready for this level of crazy, making Amelia ask if he's actually serious right now, but Shield just gives her a casual yeah, while carrying her away from the danger zone. Faye and Nidhogg go at it in the sky, trading massive energy blasts. Shield watching the whole thing with a totally calm look on his face. Amelia looks up at him, sounding pretty confused as she calls out his name, just as Shield puts his hands out and says he's starting up his barrier magic to keep them safe from the fallout. Amelia can't believe what she's seeing, asking if this is some kind of miracle happening right in front of her, but Shield just looks at the massive dome covering the whole mountain and says protecting a city is easy work for him, while the two dragons keep tearing into each other with the barrier holding. Shield looks up at the chaos and tells Amelia to stop overthinking how to fight that thing for now, but Amelia yells that it's impossible and asks how he even managed, so Shield casually mentions his barrier could handle Faye's kind easily. Amelia's eyes go into spirals as she screams back in total shock, while the two dragons clash in the sky, letting out a massive explosion of energy that rattles the whole forest. Shield just sighs and puts a hand on Amelia's head to try and get her to settle down, and then Faye floats back down to the ground, looking completely bored while complaining about how much of a pain that was. Shield tells her good job and asks if the other dragon is dead, but Faye says a hit like that won't finish him, plus her only job is protecting the place, leaving Amelia to lose her mind, yelling that this isn't a coffee break and they shouldn't be acting so calm right now. She starts clutching her head, asking if they even understand the crazy stuff they just did, like beating a legend and treating a holy barrier like it's nothing, and she keeps spiraling, wondering if she's the one who's gone crazy being stuck between two legends, while the whole town gets massive power-up. Faye just looks at her and says she's officially broken, and Shield can only stand there and agree. Shield gets serious and warns the group that dropping a massive barrier right in the middle of town is just asking for political trouble, but Faye just looks at him and asks why that's even a thing. He looks up at the sky and explains that's just how people work. Once they see someone with that kind of crazy power, they'll do anything to get their hands on it, while Amelia's voice rings out from the background, practically begging everyone to just give her a break for once. Later on, back at the estate, Albert sits everyone down and admits he knew Shield was a royal magician, but he never imagined he was the legend behind that actual miracle barrier. The mood gets heavy as Albert looks totally stressed out. He apologizes but tells Shield he's officially fired from his job as a tutor because Shield can't believe it and slams his hands on the table, asking if he's seriously losing his job right now. Albert explains that Shield isn't just a normal mage, he's a guy whose power could literally change the map of the entire continent, and having someone like him just hanging out would completely wreck the peace and the balance with all the nearby country. He keeps going, sounding almost frantic as he asks why the kingdom would ever be dumb enough to let go of a guy who can build an entire nation's defense wall solo. Shield just stands there sweating, telling the Margrave that even if he vents to him about it, he doesn't really have an answer for why things ended up this way. Shield starts wondering if there's some hidden plan he's not in on. Maybe he just wasn't needed anymore, but Albert shuts that down immediately. He tells him that's impossible because that specific barrier is the only reason the kingdom of Helena has stayed so powerful against its neighbors recently. He keeps going, pointing out that it's not even an exaggeration to say that barrier alone pretty much decided the fate of the entire continent. S.H.I.E.L.D. just stands there in total shock. He had no idea he was actually such a big deal in other countries, and he starts thinking back to how he was treated at home. He definitely wasn't a hero there. People used to talk behind his back, saying he hadn't done anything worth mentioning besides that one barrier. They even complained he was a waste of tax money, treating his magic like it was just some basic thing everyone deserved. There were even people who didn't want him becoming a royal magician at all. Albert loses it when he hears that, yelling about how the kingdom must have gone completely brain dead to treat someone like him that way. The Margrave takes a breath and tries to calm down with some tea, mentioning he's already reaching out to the higher-ups in the capital. He admits that a situation this big is way beyond what he can handle on his own, while S.H.I.E.L.D. just slumps over with his head in his hands, complaining that he worked his butt off only to get fired anyway. Faye just looks at him and says it was pretty obvious he'd get stuck in a political mess after showing off magic that huge. S.H.I.E.L.D. gets fired up while Albert pours some tea, complaining that if Faye had just dealt with Nidhogg a bit more cleanly, they wouldn't be dealing with all this political drama. But Faye isn't having it. She tells him to stop being so unrealistic since that dragon was no joke, and even if it looked easy, she could have been killed if she stopped paying attention for even a second. Albert stops mid-pour, completely frozen. He asks them what they just said, sounding like he can't believe his ears, and the guy starts sweating bullets. He mentions he heard rumors about Nidhogg and Bahamut appearing, then asks if the two of them really just walked into a fight between literal gods. S.H.I.E.L.D. just looks confused by the whole god thing, while Faye stands there looking totally unimpressed with the conversation. S.H.I.E.L.D. casually points at Faye and drops the bomb, telling Albert that she's actually the Bahamut everyone is talking about. Albert is so shocked he can't even get a real sentence out. Faye shows off her golden wings that she hasn't been able to hide properly, and S.H.I.E.L.D. adds that she's the reason the town is still standing after the Nidhogg attack. Amelia notices her dad looks like he's about to faint and asks if he's okay, while Albert just mumbles about how none of this makes any sense, because in this part of the world, people actually worship dragons as god. He stares at the floor, saying there's no way he can wrap his mind around a god just hanging out in his house. S.H.I.E.L.D. just shrugs and repeats the guy's words back to Faye, who just crosses her arms and lets out a little huff like it's no big deal. Albert is literally clutching his stomach from the stress of having a dragon god in his living room. He groans about the pain while Amelia asks if he's actually going to be okay. The guy admits that dealing with a legend is way too much for him to handle alone, so he asks S.H.I.E.L.D. and Faye to just wait at the estate until the government people show up. He takes a breath and looks over at S.H.I.E.L.D., starting to suggest something a bit more serious, and Albert makes a real offer, saying that if they can give S.H.I.E.L.D. a proper place to stay in the country, he wants to know if S.H.I.E.L.D. would officially join their side as an ally. S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't give a straight answer right away, just letting out a quiet response while he thinks it over, because deep down, he's worried that history is just going to repeat itself. He can already see a future where people just use his power and then toss him aside the moment they're done. He looks out over the grounds, wondering if there's a better path he could take, something that would actually let him live his life on his own terms for once. Later on, the group heads to the dining hall and S.H.I.E.L.D. completely loses it when he sees the table. Even Faye looks a little stunned by the massive feast waiting for them. S.H.I.E.L.D. realizes the food is way more expensive and fancy than what they had yesterday, mostly because Albert is now trying to impress the god sitting at his table. He looks at the giant piles of lobster and gourmet dishes, sweating a bit as he realizes there's no way they can even finish half of what's in front of them. Faye's eyes are literally sparkling as she drools over the massive spread. She says it looks delicious, while S.H.I.E.L.D. just watches, wondering if she can actually finish all that food by herself. S.H.I.E.L.D. notices something weird and looks over at Amelia, who's just sitting there with this heavy dark stare. He starts to get a bad feeling, wondering if he's the only one picking up on her intense vibe. Faye doesn't hold back at all and says Amelia looks like she wants to get with S.H.I.E.L.D. It's so blunt that S.H.I.E.L.D. completely loses it, panicking because she's saying all this right in front of the girl. After the awkwardness settles, Faye takes a bite of her food and tells S.H.I.E.L.D. he's definitely the type of guy who just ends up in the middle of an annoying situation. But then she gives him a little smirk, admitting that even though he's a magnet for trouble, following him around is actually pretty interesting. S.H.I.E.L.D. is practically sweating as he feels these scary vibes coming off her. He starts to second guess his life choices, wondering if traveling with a dragon god is really the best idea for his health. Faye just keeps that mischievous look on her face. She tells him to wait up because if things ever get too annoying for them, she'll just grab him and run away together. She even thinks it wouldn't be so bad to just travel somewhere far away where they don't have to deal with people at all. S.H.I.E.L.D. watches her eat and decides to just let it go for now. He thinks to himself that as long as they're having fun together, there's no point in stressing about it too much. The sun begins to set over the massive estate, everything finally quiet for the night. S.H.I.E.L.D. is following Amelia through the estate, but he's already getting a bad vibe. He asks if they're even going the right way, but she just gives him a simple yes and keeps walking. Suddenly, a giant flying bug comes out of nowhere and dives right at him. Shield completely loses his cool as the monster closes in. They make it to a super sketchy looking rope bridge. Shield looks totally drained and asks if it's even safe to cross, but Amelia just smiles and says yes. The bridge is a total disaster. Shield ends up falling straight down into the canyon, screaming for his life while Amelia just watches from the top. After climbing back up, Shield is physically and mentally wrecked. He asks if she's literally just going to say yes to everything he says, and she just replies with another yes like it's nothing. He's practically in tears because she won't stop clinging to his arm. Shield realizes she's going to be a nightmare to deal with if she stays stuck to him like this. He tries to set some boundaries, telling her that she's standing way too close for comfort, but Amelia doesn't back off at all. She calls him teacher and says she's staying right where she is, and Shield can feel her pressing against him, making the whole thing even more awkward. Faye is watching the whole drama unfold and says Amelia is basically acting like a cat in heat. She tells Shield that if he just gave her what she wanted, he'd probably be free to go. Shield completely snaps at the suggestion. He yells that there's no way he's ever doing that, looking like he's reached his absolute breaking point. Shield is walking through town with Amelia still stuck to his arm and Faye by his side. He's thinking that even though he's with two beautiful girls, he's not happy about it and just hopes things don't get any weirder. But then a voice calls out from above, catching them all by surprise. High up on a roof, a girl with cat ears is looking down at them. She says Shield looks exactly like the person she was told to find. Shield stares up at the stranger and demands to know who the hell she is. She smiles and introduces herself as Meryl, telling them she's a master swordsman from the Beast Kingdom of Iliad. Her eyes lock onto Shield as she tells him to get used to seeing her face. As she jumps down from the building with a massive sword on her back, Shield stands his ground and asks what she wants with him. She lands smoothly and mentions that her intelligence department heard all about how he got exiled from the kingdom, but she explains her queen actually sent her to bring him back as a national treasure, a title that catches Amelia completely off guard. Meryl asks if he'll come along to the Beast Kingdom willingly, but she makes it very clear that since this is a royal order, she's ready to take him by force if he tries to refuse. Meryl leans in with a smirk, telling Shield to be careful with how he answers her. Shield looks down. He's got a really bad feeling about where this is going, especially since he just wanted a normal, high-paying job. He starts to get his answer, beginning by telling her that he's sorry, but he isn't in a position where he can just decide his own path right now, and that's his final word on the matter. Meryl just smiles and says she understands how it is, but then she reaches for the giant sword on her back, telling him that once he wakes up, they'll already be in the Beast Kingdom. Shield is caught off guard, wondering what she means by waking up there, and suddenly Meryl lunges forward, swinging her massive blade in a wide, crushing arc. Shield instantly puts up a barrier and uses a weapon destruction skill, but Meryl manages to skid back, totally shocked that he stopped her. Shield looks on, feeling a bit of sweat. He's thinking that her weapon should have snapped in half from that hit, and yet it's still in one piece. Meryl looks at her sword and wonders if the damage from her own hit just got reflected back. She calls his barrier magic interesting, while Shield realizes that since her blade was made by a master beastkin smith, it won't break that easily, and Meryl just tightens her grip and says, well then, before leaping high into the air, turning into a silhouette against the bright sun. She gives a little smirk, asking him if he thinks he can block the next thing she's got. Then she suddenly vanishes from sight, moving way too fast for him to keep up with. Shield stands his ground and decides to just put up a wide-range barrier for now. He can still feel her moving somewhere nearby, but the attack hasn't actually landed yet, so he starts sweating while looking around, wondering when the strike is finally going to hit. Right then, a massive force slams into the side of the barrier with a heavy blur. Meryl braces herself as the impact from her own strike ripples through her blade. Shield just smirks while she freaks out, yelling about how his barrier suddenly changed its shape into a circle. He activates a physical reflection barrier that sends Meryl flying backward. She grunts in pain as she skids across the ground, struggling to catch her footing. Standing in the middle of the road, Meryl looks completely trashed with her clothes torn and bruises everywhere. Shield is actually shocked to see her moving, asking if she can really still stand after a hit like that. She just glares back, thinking about how this guy has a scary amount of stamina to keep this up. As debris falls around her, Meryl realizes she's finally seen what Shield Rayless is truly capable of. She looks at her hand and says her theory was right, since the power of her own sword was just reflected back at her. Shield looks her dead in the eye and tells her he's sorry, but her sword is never going to reach him. Shield points out that if her sword had actually hit him, he'd be a goner, then asks if she really thinks she can just take a national treasure's head home. Meryl doesn't back down, telling him that if a person can't even defend themselves, their country has no use for them anyway. Shield just gives a little laugh, saying it sounds like a classic case of survival of the fittest. Meryl grips her sword tight, despite her clothes being torn, and her body being covered in bruises, whispering to herself that she's not done yet. With a wild look in her eyes, she shows her teeth and tells him she's coming at him one more time. She moves with insane speed, turning into a blur that circles around S.H.I.E.L.D. as he stands in the middle of the street. S.H.I.E.L.D. tracks her movement, thinking that she's moving so fast, he's almost about to lose track of where she is. As she closes in, Meryl realizes that unless she manages to smash through his barrier, she has zero chance of winning this. She strikes from every possible angle, but S.H.I.E.L.D. just stands there and tells her it's totally useless no matter where she comes from. Meryl starts to breathe heavy, sweating as it finally hits her that absolutely none of her attacks are getting through to him. Meryl puts everything she's got left into one final swing, yelling that this is the end, but it doesn't go her way at all, and she ends up getting blasted backward with her clothes completely shredded. She slams into a wall, coughing up blood as the force of the hit leaves a nasty mark on the stone. S.H.I.E.L.D. just watches her, acting all casual while he tells her that was actually a pretty decent try. Meryl stands there looking beat, admitting she lost and realizing that even with her rank, she couldn't even get close to him. S.H.I.E.L.D. suddenly loses his cool, yelling at her to hide herself because her shredded clothes are showing way too much. Meryl is just confused, which makes S.H.I.E.L.D. freak out even more about how she can be so calm when she's practically exposed. He hands over his own cloak, telling her she can use it for now, and she gives him a quick thanks as she starts putting it on, looking like she's already thinking about her next move because, even though she lost the fight, she's still got orders from her queen to bring him and his crazy barrier magic back home. S.H.I.E.L.D. decides they should hang out in this town for a bit to rest up and figure out a new plan, and he starts laughing to himself, thinking about how he kind of feels like the villain in this situation. Faye tells everyone it's time to go grab a bite to eat, so Amelia grabs S.H.I.E.L.D.'s arm, and they start heading out, but Meryl stops him right there, calling out his name to get his attention. She gets this look on her face and mentions she has something personal she wants to ask him about, so S.H.I.E.L.D. stops and turns around, asking her what she's got on her mind. Meryl doesn't hold back at all. She grabs him by the chin, pulls him close, and asks if he'll be her husband. The whole group just freezes in place. Faye and Amelia look completely floored while S.H.I.E.L.D. can barely get out a confused huh. S.H.I.E.L.D. absolutely loses his cool, screaming the word husband back at her while the other girls freak out in the background, and he starts backing away as fast as he can, asking if she seriously means they're supposed to get married. Meryl explains that she made a promise to herself to only marry a guy who could actually beat her in a fight, so now she's telling S.H.I.E.L.D. he's coming back to her country to be her husband. But Amelia completely loses it, screaming at her because the two of them were literally trying to kill each other just a few minutes ago. The chaos keeps building until Amelia just yells for everyone to shut up and stop talking for a second, and she grabs onto S.H.I.E.L.D.'s arm, telling Meryl that he's hers and nobody else can have him. Amelia keeps ranting about her claim on him, but then Faye jumps into the argument by saying that S.H.I.E.L.D. is actually exactly her type too, which just makes Meryl laugh, and she fires back a mean comment about how the other girls' bodies are way too small to ever keep a guy like him happy. Amelia looks totally crushed by the insult, while Meryl smugly tells her that the competition is basically over. Then Meryl turns her focus toward Faye, pointing out that she's clearly not human and asking if she has some secret reason for sticking by S.H.I.E.L.D.'s side. Faye just gets this playful look on her face and says Meryl is starting to say some really interesting stuff, but then she admits the only thing she really wants to do is eat him, making S.H.I.E.L.D. realize she still hasn't dropped the idea of making him her next meal. Faye explains that her dragon ability actually lets her steal the powers of anyone and S.H.I.E.L.D. looks pretty stressed out, asking if she really had those kinds of scary plans for him all along. Meryl isn't exactly thrilled either, asking Faye if she seriously plans on eating the man who's going to be her husband. Faye just brushes it off, saying she isn't trying to stop them from being together since human lives are so short anyway, so she suggests they all just be friends for now, and she'll wait until S.H.I.E.L.D. is old and senile before she finally makes him a meal. Meryl actually likes that idea and asks the Dragon King to witness their marriage. Faye just nods along like it's no big deal. The two of them shake hands on the agreement while S.H.I.E.L.D. yells about how nobody is asking for his opinion, and Amelia screams that she's never letting him go. Amelia keeps throwing a tantrum, promising to bury both of them once she finally hits her growth spurt, leaving S.H.I.E.L.D. completely ignored. But then a dark voice suddenly cuts in from the side, asking if she can join the conversation since it sounds so interesting, and as she steps closer, she mentions how she didn't believe the rumors about the exile until she saw it for herself. The new girl introduces herself with a polite smile, addressing S.H.I.E.L.D. by his full name while looking him over. She notes how rare it is to actually run into someone else who uses space magic. She says her name is Gabrielle Parley, and she's the representative of Minute, here specifically to bring him back with her. S.H.I.E.L.D. just looks exhausted, thinking to himself about how he's already heard this same recruitment speech a dozen times today. He tells her he's sorry, but he's already made up his mind about not going anywhere for a while, though Gabriel doesn't seem to care about his answer, saying she likes stubborn guys but her job is still to bring him in. She claims she's an expert at getting what she wants before vanishing into thin air, leaving Shield and the girls staring at an empty street. Shield barely has time to react before he feels a hand suddenly grip his shoulder from behind, but as Gabriel tries to make her move, she gets slammed back by an invisible force that catches her completely off guard. She starts panicking, trying to figure out if she hit a wall or got reflected by some kind of hidden barrier she can't even see. Gabriel realizes this isn't going to be as easy as she thought. She stands her ground and Faye just watches from the sidelines, looking pretty unimpressed with how things are going so far. While Meryl and Amelia look like they're about to lose it, Faye calmly mentions that something huge is coming, and Shield barely has time to ask what's happening before a massive stone foot comes crashing down right in front of him. Gabriel is actually sitting on the shoulder of a giant rock ogre, telling Shield she's just going to use brute force now. She looks a bit annoyed, thinking to herself about how much of a hassle it'll be if the town gets wrecked during this. Shield just smirks while he moves, teasing her for actually having enough room to worry about saving the town right now. Gabriel shrugs it off and says that since he's being difficult, she can't really help it if he gets a little hurt. Then she gives him a pretty scary look and tells him he better not die on her. The massive stone monster slams down with enough power to level the whole street. The giant stone hand slams into the street with a massive crash. Gabriel watches the dust settle, acting all confident and saying there was no way Shield could stop that hit. But she suddenly sees something through the rubble that makes her face go totally blank. Shield is standing there perfectly fine behind a glowing barrier, just rubbing the back of his head and saying that actually surprised him. He turns around like nothing happened and asks Gabriel if she was trying to say something to him. Gabriel gets this creepy look on her face and says she guess it has to be at least this hard to be fun, and she floats up high while telling him to keep her company a bit longer. Even though Shield notices the next rock looks way smaller, she just laughs at him, saying it's a pretty bad idea to only believe what your eyes are showing you right now. As her eye reflects a massive shadow, she tells him that what he's seeing is really just the tip of the iceberg. A giant black void starts spreading out from the bottom of the floating rock, making things look way worse. Shield starts losing it, yelling that if they don't do something, the entire town is going to get flattened. But Gabriel just acts cool about it, saying a little damage is expected at this point, which only makes Shield yell louder that this is way past being a small problem. Meryl watches the chaos unfold and asks Gabriel if she's really okay with dragging all of them into the middle of this mess too, while Bahamut stands nearby looking completely over it, just muttering about what a huge pain the whole situation is. Gabriel starts sweating, shouting back that things are just as desperate on her end. Seeing her get serious, Shield realizes he can't afford to go easy or hold back anymore. Gabriel floats in the air and screams for the massive rock to fall, sending the whole mountain of stone crashing down toward the city streets, while the people below scramble to find any kind of cover. Gabriel starts to smile, thinking for a split second that she actually won, but then her eyes go wide as Shield stands his ground and unleashes a massive blast that stops everything, leaving Gabriel totally stunned and asking how he could even do that. Gabriel is hitting her limit and decides if she's going down, she's taking him with her, yelling that she's going to teleport Shield and the whole area straight back to Minute. Shield just gives her a smug look and replies that he's just going to use his barrier magic to bounce that right back at her. Gabriel fires off her forced teleportation magic, but Shield is ready for it. He triggers his barrier reflection, and the two powers collide in a massive flash of light. Shield stands there looking pretty pleased with himself, casually mentioning how there was no way a move like that was ever going to work. But then a confused voice breaks the silence as someone notices something is very wrong. Gabriel stands there in total shock. The reflective magic worked a little too well, and now she's standing there without a single stitch of clothing on. Shield starts choking on his own breath, while Meryl just stares at him. Meanwhile, Amelia starts cheering about how she knew Shield was into girls with big chests. It finally clicks for Gabriel, and she lets out a loud scream, trying to cover herself up as fast as she can. She glares at Shield with a bright red face, asking if he reflected the magic just to strip her. But Shield starts panicking, swearing that it was a total accident. After the chaos finally dies down, Shield walks through the town feeling completely exhausted, just wanting to put this whole mess behind him. Shield is totally flustered as he holds out some clothes, telling Gabriel to just hurry up and put them on. But she just gives him a smug look, asking if he really expects her to dress herself after he was the one who stripped her. The guy is basically at his breaking point, crying and apologizing over and over while begging her to just get dressed. Meanwhile, Gabriel seems to be enjoying his reaction way too much. Once she finally gets her coat back on, Gabriel starts giggling to herself and tells Shield that after what happened, he definitely has to take responsibility for her now. But Meryl isn't having any of it. She points right at Gabriel and tells the sea person she's out of luck because she's already decided that Shield is going to be her husband. The vibe gets tense fast as Gabriel shoots back that Shield doesn't seem like the type to like violent women, which immediately makes Meryl snap at her, and poor Shield can only stand there sweating while they glare at each other. Neither girl is backing down, with Gabriel claiming she'd be a much better partner for him at night, but Meryl just huffs, saying she's got plenty of confidence in herself when it comes to that stuff too. They both move in close, putting the pressure on Shield by demanding to know which one of them he actually likes more, and Shield just stands there looking completely overwhelmed, making a choked up sound because he has no idea how to handle being stuck between them. He finally finds his voice and reminds them both that they were literally just trying to kidnap him by force a few minutes ago, so because of everything that's happened, he tells them straight up that he just can't see either of them in a romantic way right now. Meryl looks pretty determined as she decides to herself that she'll just take Shield back home and take all the time she needs to win him over. But Gabriel is on the same page, saying she's planning on doing the exact same thing. Amelia isn't having any of it though. She gets right in their faces and yells that Shield belongs to her and nobody else. The poor guy is losing his mind at this point, screaming that they aren't even listening to anything he's saying, but Bahamut cuts through the noise, reminding everyone that the Margrave is bringing some high-level officials by soon, so she suggests they should probably just sit down and talk this out like adults representing their country. Gabriel thinks that's a fair point, then turns to Meryl with a smug look and asks the beast-smelling woman if she can handle that, and Meryl shoots back that she's fine with it, as long as the shameless woman is on board too. Meanwhile, Bahamut just mumbles to herself that none of this matters since she's going to be the one eating Shield later. Shield tries to step in with a nervous laugh, trying to explain how he feels about all this, but Gabriel just stares him down and asks what he wants, basically shutting him up before he can even start. Someone tells the whole group to look over toward the forest and Shield is just standing there in shock, barely able to believe what he's seen. Gabriel watches from the side as a massive structure in the distance completely shatters, sending debris everywhere. Bahamut looks pretty shaken, realizing the barrier that kept her dragon kin out for 3 years is just gone. The group stands together as someone mentions the whole thing happened way faster than they ever expected. The destruction is massive and Meryl can only watch as the kingdom's defenses turn into a pile of rubble. She starts laughing though, pointing out how the big barrier that was the foundation of the Hellenic kingdom is officially history. Gabriel says it's the start of a new era, while Shield just stares ahead thinking about how long the road here actually was. Gabriel keeps going, mentioning how the balance of power in the world is going to be decided by where Shield decides to stay. Shield looks on with a serious face, thinking to himself about how fast everything can just fall apart. Shield stares ahead, thinking to himself that everything happening with the old kingdom isn't his problem anymore, but he's quickly pulled back to reality as someone clenches their hands and says it's time to get started. The group gathers in a bright room where Gabriel officially opens the meeting to decide what happens next for the former royal magician. Shield looks out the window at the peaceful view, realizing he really needs to put some serious thought into his future. Margrave Albert clears his throat to get everyone's attention, announcing that his home country of Marray is going to lead with their offer, and he doesn't hold back, promising a permanent job at court with a salary 10 times higher than any other nation would ever pay him. Albert throws an account's title and plenty of land for good measure, making Shield think that moving to Uri sounds like a pretty sweet deal. Just as he's considering it, Meryl speaks up from the back, asking if she can have her turn to talk now. She lays out a massive scroll, explaining that her kingdom will make him a duke and give him land that covers 10% of their entire country. Shield is left totally speechless by the sheer scale of the offer, since having that much land basically makes him as powerful as a king. Shield makes a quick decision, announcing that he's going to live in the kingdom of Ilya. It's a huge move, and just as he says it, Gabriel speaks up from the center of the table, reminding everyone that Minute hasn't made their offer yet. She says it's finally time for her to lay out their conditions, so she gets right to it, promising Shield the title of Duke along with massive amounts of land and even his own access to the sea. Gabriel keeps the pressure on, telling Shield that seeing someone with his level of talent develop their territory would be a dream come true, and Shield is actually moved to tears by how much she seems to value him, thinking that Minute might be the place to go. But she isn't even done yet. She leans over the table and tells the other leaders that if they agree to let Shield join her country, she will literally give away portions of Minant's own territory to both Uri and Ilya. Albert and Meryl are both completely floored by the crazy offer, but Albert doesn't waste a second, immediately casting his vote for Shield to go to Minant. Meryl is right behind him, asking Shield if he's okay with the move since the deal is so insane. Shield jumps to his feet and loses it, yelling at them for being so quick to sell him out just for some extra land though. The focus shifts away to the kingdom of Helena, where total chaos is breaking out because their permanent magic barrier just got smashed to pieces. The Knight Commander, Caraceres, walks into the throne room and kneels down, letting the king know that he's finally arrived, and the king immediately loses his cool, screaming Caraceres' name. He demands to know where S.H.I.E.L.D. is and why he hasn't shown up yet, especially since the barrier's been broken for half a day. So Caraceres looks pretty stressed as he explains that S.H.I.E.L.D. actually went missing about 3 weeks ago, and the search for him has been a total mess. He asks the king to just leave the whole search for S.H.I.E.L.D. rayless to him personally, claiming it'll take some of the pressure off his men, and the king goes along with it, telling him it's fine for him to take the lead since this whole situation is a disaster. Caraceres thanks him and says if the king needs anything else, he should just come straight to him, but the king is still suspicious, wondering why Elaine kept all of this a secret from him, and why she's acting so calm when the guy she's supposed to marry is gone. Caraceres says he'll look into that too, and the king tells him to get it done because he's exhausted and just wants to go lie down. The king tells him to get out of his sight, and Caraceres gives a quick nod before heading out. But once he's alone, he completely loses his composure, slamming his fist down and cursing because things aren't going his way. Caraceres is absolutely losing it, yelling at Elaine, and asking why she even thought of such a stupid plan in the first place. But she just stands there with her arms crossed, arguing that nobody could have known the perfect barrier would actually break. He just snaps back that it's way too late for excuses. Elaine reminds him that this was the only way for her to marry the prince, and since he's her accomplice, he'd better not try to snake his way out of the blame. He shouts back that the only reason he even helped her was because she promised to make him prime minister for life once she became queen. Elaine looks at him like he's pathetic, asking if he's really going to try and pin this entire mess on her now. She starts acting all dramatic, covering her face and crying about how all she ever wanted was to be with the prince she loved, while Caraceres stands by the desk, just growling to himself because he's so fed up with the way things are going. He gets a dark look in his eyes, determined to keep the truth hidden no matter what it takes. Outside the castle, the plan is already moving. They're going to use money to shut up anyone who saw the engagement fall apart, and some of the guys are even laughing about it, saying the search for S.H.I.E.L.D. is all theirs now. They're planning to torture him into fixing the barrier the second they find him. Caraceres is locked in, telling himself that everything will work out fine as long as they can just get the barrier back. He's already moving on the next phase, telling Elaine he's leaving her part of the job to her as she heads out the door. Once she's gone, he lets out a frustrated sigh, clearly feeling the pressure of how bad things have gotten. But he's got one more card to play, wondering if it's finally time to bring that specific guy into the mix to finish. Meanwhile, S.H.I.E.L.D. is hanging out with Gabriel and admits the offer from Minette sounds pretty tempting, but he's not planning on going anywhere, honestly telling her he's just looking for a job that pays a ton without any of the usual drama. Gabriel just looks at him like he's dreaming, saying a job like that doesn't exist, especially since every country is going to be hunting him down for his barrier power. S.H.I.E.L.D. gets a bit of a reality check and realizes there might not be a chill place left for him in this world anymore, so Gabriel tries a different approach, putting her hand on a document and offering him the land of Marray to the east. S.H.I.E.L.D. tries to shut it down and reminds her he already said no, but she just cuts him off and tells him he's totally missing the point. Gabriel shows off a massive fortress city by a waterfall and tells S.H.I.E.L.D. he should turn this place, Marray, into his own private territory. The idea catches S.H.I.E.L.D. off guard, and he admits that having his own land makes him feel like he's basically becoming a king, which Gabriel confirms is exactly the point, explaining that it would make him officially independent from their country. But there's a catch, as she asks him to put up barriers around the cities near the dragon forest in exchange for the land. Meryl jumps in saying that getting rid of the dragon threat is a huge win for everyone, and Albert agrees it would make every nation feel a lot safer. Gabriel looks right at S.H.I.E.L.D. and tells him his power is just way too big to be tied down to any single country, and she points out that having his barriers in those specific cities would boost their defenses way higher than anything they have now. Meryl gives Gabriel props for being smart and not just a pretty face, while Gabriel just laughs and thanks the cat swordsman for the compliment. S.H.I.E.L.D. thinks it over and realizes it's actually a pretty sweet deal, especially since he knows Marray is a place filled with tons of resources. Gabriel grabs a pen to make it official and says they should get started, leaving S.H.I.E.L.D. a little stunned as he realizes this is actually happening. Albert and Gabriel look pretty hyped about the deal, so S.H.I.E.L.D. suggests they break out some champagne to celebrate. The whole group raises their glasses and toasts to the big decision they just made together. Following through on the contract, S.H.I.E.L.D. starts by setting up barriers in the north for the Beastkin Nation, and finally covers the top city of Minette with his magic. Once the work is finished, S.H.I.E.L.D. stretches and lets out a big yawn, but Bahamut just asks if that was really supposed to take him all day. S.H.I.E.L.D. immediately tells her to quiet down and explains that while he could have done it in an hour, it would have looked way too suspicious. Gabriel thanks him and admits she's impressed as they look over the massive dome protecting the city. Shield wonders if it's actually cool for him to just wander around the country of Minute whenever he feels like it. He mentions he wants to check out the area before heading to his new territory, so Gabriel hands him a pass to get through all the checkpoints. But that's not all, as she pulls out a beaded bracelet, making Shield ask what he's supposed to do with it. Gabriel tells him it's made of ruby magic stones and acts as the official proof that he's the lord of his own land. Shield thanks Gabriel for everything she's done, but she just smiles and tells him to show his gratitude with a marriage license. It only gets more chaotic when Meryl clings to his arm, begging him to stay and be her husband, while Gabriel reminds him that his new title doesn't change their deal. Bahamut just stands by watching the whole mess unfold, looking completely over the drama, so Shield decides to make a break for it, running into the woods and yelling back that he's gonna leave her behind if she doesn't move it. Once they're away and on the road, Bahamut calls out to him to get his attention. She asks him exactly how much travel money Gabriel gave them for the trip, and Shield tells her it was 10,000 gold. Bahamut has no clue about human currency, so she asks what that kind of money is even worth. Shield checks his coin pouch and explains that the gold should have been enough to let them travel comfortably for at least 10 days. But Bahamut points out a huge problem. It's only been 3 days, and she asks why they're already out of cash. Shield completely loses his cool and yells at her, asking who the heck she thinks ate 10 full meals at once without even blinking. Shield is totally wiped out, complaining that they're gonna starve to death before they even reach their destination. His stomach lets out a massive growl, but Bahamut just tells him he needs to go get a job. Shield loses it and asks if she has any plans on working too, but she just looks back, acting like the idea of her working is the craziest thing she's ever heard. She smiles and says she has zero reason to work, especially since she can just eat him if he ends up dropping dead on the road. It finally clicks for Shield. He realizes that to her, he's basically just a giant walking drumstick. Since they're broke, he starts thinking about how to make some cash without drawing attention to himself, and he realizes there's only one real option. Bahamut warns him not to go doing anything illegal, but he just yells back that he's not becoming a criminal as he heads toward town. They walk up to a large building where a voice from inside calls out a loud welcome to them. The place is full of loud, muscular guys drinking and celebrating, and Shield realizes they've officially made it to the local Adventurers Guild. Bahamut looks around and casually mentions that everyone in the room looks super weak, making Shield freak out and tell her to be quiet before someone hears her. They head to the counter where a cheerful receptionist greets them with a big smile, asking if they're there to pick up a job or post one. Shield steps up to the counter and tells the girl he wants to sign up as an adventurer and pick up his first quest. The receptionist takes one look at him and just pauses for a second, almost like she's sizing him up. She gives him this little smirk while saying she understands, which immediately sets Shield off. He starts yelling that she totally just thought he looked like a total weakling. She quickly tries to laugh it off while starting on the paperwork, telling him it's nothing like that. She asks if he has any actual experience being an adventurer, but Shield has to admit he's got zero background in it. Moving on, she asks if there's anyone powerful who can vouch for how strong he is. Shield just stands there looking smug while admitting he doesn't have a guarantor either, since he's got no experience and no one to back him up. She happily tells him he's starting out at E rank. She slides a paper across the counter showing a bunch of basic chores like picking herbs and hunting slime. Shield looks at the list and asks where the actual monster hunting jobs are, but she just smiles and reminds him he's stuck with the basics because of his rank. He loses it and yells that he's never going to make any money doing grunt work like this, but she just keeps that cheerful smile while reminding him again that's just life as an E rank. Shield gets fired up and yells that he's got someone with him who eats enough for 10 people, but Bahamut just stands there looking completely lost. Right in the middle of his rant, some guy's voice cuts through the noise and notices things are getting pretty loud. A blonde guy in a white cloak walks over and asks Shield if he's having a hard time with something. The second the receptionist sees him, she gets hearts in her eyes and looks like she's about to faint from excitement. Shield isn't impressed at all. He just looks over his shoulder and asks who this guy is supposed to be. The staff member yells out the name Azaz as the guy strikes a pose, clearly used to being the center of attention. The receptionist explains to Azaz that Shield is complaining about wanting a much harder job, but Shield just snaps that he can handle the risk himself. Azaz takes a second and then just says that sounds fine by him. He throws his arm around Shield's shoulder and tells him he'll show him how high-level adventurers really do things, so he should just follow along. The receptionist watches them go, thinking about how Azaz is the top B rank in the city and wondering why he'd bother helping out a rookie. Azaz strikes a pose and flashes a big confident smile, telling the group that everything is fine, and this work will be a great contribution to the guild. Shield isn't feeling the vibe at all, grumbling to himself about how Aziz is just a tall, handsome jerk, though Bahamut points out that's not even a real insult. Back at the counter, Aziz looks over the paperwork and asks Shield if he's cool with splitting the reward money right down the middle, and Shield puts on a fake happy face and says he's super grateful, all while laughing internally because Aziz has no idea he's splitting one share between two people. The receptionist hands over the details for the Jingame quest, showing off a picture of a massive, spiky turtle monster that Shield has never heard of before. The group heads out to a rocky canyon where Aziz warns them to stay alert for small fry, explaining that the Jingame is basically A rank because its shell blocks almost everything. While Aziz explains how the turtle hides in its shell to make things difficult, Shield notices Bahamut is already snacking and asks where she even found food, but his mind quickly drifts back to the mission as he realizes that if the enemy just stays inside a shell, his own barrier magic might actually be the perfect way to wait. The realization hits him that he still can't actually land an attack, and he starts losing it over why they're hunting something that just hides all day. Aziz catches him looking totally stressed out and tells him he looks pale, joking that it's way too late to try and run away now. Shield snaps back that he isn't scared at all, and the quest is going to be easy, while Aziz just stands there laughing at him. Even as Shield keeps throwing a tantrum, Aziz just pats his head and points out that they haven't run into a single monster yet. Aziz says that's just how it goes in this area, but when Shield asks him what that's supposed to mean, he just brushes it off like it's nothing. Then he asks who's going to be in the front, and who's taking the back between Shield and Faye. Shield tells him they don't really do the whole roles thing, and Faye agrees they don't need them, leaving Aziz totally floored by how they operate. Aziz just facepalms and calls them total amateurs, explaining that picking roles is the only way to actually handle different monsters and fight right. But then he eases up and tells Shield not to worry about it since he's there to carry, so Shield just needs to focus on staying safe. He tells Shield to stay hidden in the back and not do anything crazy, and Shield starts thinking the guy might actually be a decent person after all. But the talk ends fast when Aziz looks ahead and says that the enemy is finally here. A massive monster with huge teeth and rocky skin shows up right in front of them, looking ready to wreck everything in its path. Aziz steps up and tells the group to leave the monster to him, but Shield tries to stop him, warning that attacking without a plan is a bad move. Aziz doesn't listen and jumps in, yelling that he'll finish it in one shot before it can hide, only to get bounced right off the monster's hard shell, sending him flying back. He's totally shocked when he realizes his big attack didn't even leave a scratch. Aziz starts calling the monster a coward for hiding, while Shield realizes his normal barriers won't work here, so he just stands there watching Aziz swing away, knowing those hits aren't doing anything. He notices the sword is starting to crack and thinks it'll break way before the monster does. Shield decides he has to do something and tells Aziz to just take this, casting a physical reinforcement barrier on the blade to give it the power it needs. Aziz yells at Shield to stay back and out of the way, but Shield just tells him he couldn't even get close if he tried since the attacks Aziz is throwing out are way too weak to actually do anything. Shield watches him struggle and realizes he can use his barrier magic to harden the sword itself. If he buffs the blade, it might actually have enough power to break through. Aziz doesn't know what's happening and just goes for another big swing, yelling at the top of his lungs while the blade connects with a massive thud. He's actually surprised because for some reason, his hit feels a lot stronger. He gets totally hyped up and says he's finally on a roll, shouting that he's going to slice right through that hard shell. He lets out a huge slash that actually leaves a mark on the beast for the first time. It's a complete shock to see the monster finally take some real damage, but then the creature starts spinning and picking up speed. Shield yells that it's charging right for them, and he knows he's got to move fast. He reaches out, thinking he has to get a barrier on Aziz before the guy gets crushed. The force of the monster's charge hits like a literal bomb, and Aziz barely has time to get his sword up before the impact sends him flying backward across the cavern. Shield screams his name, watching the whole thing go south. He realizes the monster was moving way too fast for him to get a full barrier up, so Aziz took a nasty hit. The guy is hunched over and bleeding, but he manages to choke out that he's just glad he's still alive as Shield stares down the massive beast. It's finally out of its shell, but he's standing there wondering what his next move is since Aziz is totally spent. The adventurer is leaning on his sword, just trying to stay upright, saying that defending against that last hit took every bit of strength he had left. He starts panicking, yelling that the guild got the ranking totally wrong. He's convinced this thing isn't just some A-rank monster. It's a straight-up S-rank threat, and the creature doesn't give them a second to think. It towers over Aziz and lets out a roar that shakes the whole room, making Shield realize that Aziz has officially hit his limit. He can see the guy is done for, so he bites his thumb in frustration, thinking that Aziz needs to pull it together and at least get closer to him so he can help. Aziz is completely losing it yelling at Shield for being an idiot and reminding him that he was supposed to stay hidden. But he doesn't have time to stay mad. He realizes the monster is moving way faster than it was before, and Shield is feeling the same pressure. He's staring down the monster's massive teeth, thinking there's no way they can keep up with this speed, so he tries to rush in, screaming that he just needs to make it in time to stop the next attack. But everything happens in a blur. Azes tries to yell something out, but he stops cold as blood sprays across his face, leaving him staring at his own hand in total disbelief. He can't even process what just went down, wondering if the unthinkable actually happened. He looks at the carnage on the ground and asks himself if the beast is already dead. Then he calls out to Shield, his voice shaky, while he looks at a massive chunk of the monster lying in a pool of dark blood. Azes is sweating, staring at the ground and trying to make sense of the sudden turn of events, asking what this is. He finally realizes he's looking at the decapitated head of the Jenga turtle, and the fight is over just like that. Azes is just standing there, his face is completely pale as he stares at Shield, who looks totally relaxed while leaning against the giant turtle. He says the whole fight was actually a huge pain, but Azes isn't having it. He yells at Shield, asking what he even did to the monster, and Shield just casually says he put up a barrier, making Azes lose his mind even more. He grabs Shield, screaming about how he could possibly stop a high-level charge with just some basic magic. But Faye doesn't seem to care about the drama. She just says things turned out fine and starts climbing onto the carcass. Then she drops a bombshell. She tells the guy she's going to eat some of the shell, which makes Azes tell her to wait, and he starts panicking. He asks her why she would eat that, and if it's even possible to digest something so hard, but she just goes for it. Azes screams when she takes a bite, while Shield just looks disappointed that they're losing out on the money they could have made selling it. Faye starts munching away. She says it's actually not that bad once you get used to it, leaving Azes completely stunned. He just stares at her with his mouth open, asking what is even happening right now. Faye takes another look at the shell piece she just bit off and notices something. She says that just by pumping magic into it, the thing gets incredibly hard, which she finds pretty cool. Shield isn't impressed at all and tells her she should probably stop because it looks super lame, making Faye wonder if he's right, so she decides she'll only pull it out when they're actually in a jam. Shield looks back at the massive turtle and says they should pack up the rest to sell for some quick cash, but when he calls for help, he realizes Azes has completely passed out, making the whole situation a lot more annoying. Later on, Shield holds up a heavy bag of coins and says this will keep them going on their trip for a good while, while Azes just stands there staring at him, unable to believe he's hanging out with the legendary Lord Shield. Shield asks it's really okay for them to keep all the money from the monster, but Azes says it's fine since they saved his life. Shield thinks about it for a second and then asks Azes if he wants to join them on their way to Marray, since having a guy like him around could be useful. Azes turns down the offer to join the group, saying he has to stay behind since he's the top-ranked adventurer in this town. Shield tells him he's bummed out but gets it, so he just wishes him luck and says they'll see him around. As they start walking away, Faye watches Azes wave goodbye and mentions that he was actually a pretty solid guy. Shield agrees with her, revealing that he even left the guy a little parting gift to show his appreciation. A little while later, the group finally arrives at the next town on their journey, feeling a huge sense of relief. Shield says he's just glad they didn't starve to death on the way, but Faye is more worried about how fast he's spending his money. Shield loses his cool and yells that the only reason they're broke is because she keeps making them go to the most expensive shop. Faye totally ignores his complaining and points out that the place looks like a ghost town with nobody around. Shield tells her to quit changing the subject, but then he hears a door slam open nearby, and a group of guys rushes out looking completely terrified while yelling for the priest. Shield just stands there looking completely confused by the chaotic scene, while a guy nearby puts his face in his hand, cursing because he thought Shield was someone else. The man looks totally defeated, saying everything is hopeless since they can't hold out until the priest arrives, so Shield steps in and says he'll listen to their problems even if he isn't a priest, secretly hoping a win gets him a free meal. Inside a nearby house, someone's voice rings out, sounding totally shocked about the mention of a curse. The man explains that the town's water and soil are perfect, yet people are just dropping like flies for no reason. Shield finally puts the pieces together and realizes that's why everyone was so desperate to find a priest, but he puts on a brave face and tells them he'll see what he can do until the real help shows up. Faye points out that his barriers won't help with ghosts, but Shield just yells that he's out of options, since if he doesn't find a way to eat soon, he's gonna starve and become a ghost himself. Faye tells Shield she's cool with whatever happens as long as she gets fed, which just makes Shield snap at her while the townspeople in the back start wondering if they picked the wrong guy to help them. But the deal is already made, and the town leader shakes Shield's hand while telling him he's really counting on him to fix them. Moving into the woods, Shield realizes he acted all tough and rushed out of town, but now he's realizing he has absolutely no clue where he's actually going, especially since Faye points out they don't even know if this curse is a real thing yet or not. Shield starts getting a bit nervous and asks Faye if she's picked up on anything useful, but she just acts bored, saying there's no way she'd know about a curse that's so weak it can't even kill a human being. She stops suddenly and says she smells something familiar coming from nearby, which leaves Shield totally confused about what she means by familiar, until she mentions she hasn't smelled it in a few hundred years, making Shield realize that a dragon's concept of time is just completely insane. Faye leads the way toward the scent, and right as she points it out, Shield starts feeling a massive wave of magic power that's strong enough to make him break a sweat, and then he finally sees what they're up against and can't help but let out a disgusted groan. Shield stares out at the water in disbelief, pointing out how the entire lake has turned a deep shade of red. But Faye seems to recognize something, wondering if that guy was really hiding out in a place like this, which only makes Shield more confused as he asks her what she's even looking at. He stands there totally lost for words until he spots a figure with horns and pitch black eyes resting under the surface, making him realize they're looking at a demon. Faye casually explains that the guy is Azazel, her old right hand from the ancient war between gods and humans, and she warns Shield that he's actually insanely strong. But then she decides to just release the seal right then and there, causing Shield to panic and yell at her to stop before she starts something crazy. It's too late though, as the heavy magic chains holding the demon down start snapping and falling away, and Faye just smiles about it, saying this is the only way to finish the quest, since the demon's leaking power was what was making the townspeople sick in the first place. Shield completely loses it, complaining that their simple job just turned into a massive disaster that's way worse than what they started with. But the demon just steps out of the water and drops to one knee, telling Faye it's been 300 years since they last met. Azazel looks up at Faye and mentions she's still as formal as she's always been, but then his mood drops as he admits he messed up and let humans seal him away, telling her he'll take whatever punishment she gives him. Faye just reaches out and tells him to relax, saying she isn't planning on punishing him for anything, and as she pats his head, Azazel thanks her for being so nice, but then he suddenly changes the subject to something more serious. His eyes go dark and intense as he looks over, asking why there's even a human standing next to her in the first place. Shield feels the pressure and starts sweating, realizing things are about to get really bad, especially when Azazel steps forward and asks if he can just kill the guy since he's annoying to look at, which sends Shield into a total panic. Faye tries to keep it chill, reminding him that the war with the humans ended ages ago and that they actually lost. Azazel isn't having it though, saying they should just start a new war and use the human's head as a message to everyone, while dark energy starts swirling around his hand as he tells Faye he's much stronger now and she has nothing to worry about. Faye looks completely stunned as she stares at what's happening, while Azazel shows off his corruption magic, leaving Shield standing there looking totally stressed out. Azazel explains that this is a special kind of magic he spent 300 years developing while he was sealed away, and even though it's his first time actually using it, he's confident that even the legendary hero wouldn't have a way to stop it. He smiles, bragging about how incredible the spell is and how humans aren't even capable of understanding how it works, let alone fighting back. He tells Faye that if the hero ever shows up again, he'll handle the kill personally so she can focus on wiping out the rest of the humans, which makes Shield wonder if they're really talking about the same guy from the Great War 3 centuries ago. Faye stays quiet for a second, just crossing her arms and thinking, before finally telling him she won't give him permission, because there are humans in this era who are way more dangerous than the hero ever was. Azazel looks totally caught off guard, asking if she really thinks they can't win even with their combined power. Faye looks at the situation and tells Azazel that since it's basically impossible anyway, they might as well just test things out, and Azazel goes along with it, asking her where exactly this dangerous person is supposed to be hiding. Faye looks at Shield and realizes that at this rate, things are about to get really messy, leading to Azazel pointing a finger right at Shield's chest. Shield completely loses his cool, shouting and asking if he's really the target. Azazel stares him down with a look of pure disappointment, barely able to believe that this guy is supposed to be the threat, but Faye just laughs while she's crouched on the ground, saying that if they kill him now, they won't ever have to worry about a war with humans again. Azazel starts getting ready for a fight, asking for final confirmation if he should just end him right here, and Faye says yeah, just kill him. Shield is shaking and tries to get them to wait for a second so he can explain, but it's already too late because Azazel lets loose with his corruption magic, and a dark, swirling energy starts trapping Shield right where he stands. The whole forest lights up as a massive explosion goes off, completely wiping out everything in sight. Faye looks at the devastation and asks if his power really just rots and erases everything it touches. The two of them stand there together, watching the smoke and dust settle over the forest. Azazel brags that a job like this was way too easy, but Faye tells him it's way too early to let his guard down. He looks over at her with a confused face, asking her what she even means by that, and it turns out Shield is actually still alive on the ground, screaming about how scary that blast was. Azazel stares at his hand in total shock, wondering if he actually missed or if his body just isn't back to full strength yet. He decides to change things up, saying he'll try taking the guy out indirectly this time, so he triggers a massive rockfall, sending a huge slab of the cliff crashing down towards Shield. The rocks hit the ground with a massive thud, completely burying the area in a cloud of dust and debris. Azazel looks pretty satisfied with himself, already moving on and wondering which place they should start taking over first. Azazel stares down in total disbelief. He can't believe the guy survived that, and Shield starts coughing through the dust, yelling up at the cliff that they should at least give him a second to think of a plan. Azazel looks pretty annoyed, saying he guess he'll just have to deal with this directly, even though he really hates the idea of having to touch a filthy human like Shield. Suddenly, Azazel vanishes from the cliff in a blur, and Shield realizes he's gone. He spins around frantically, looking everywhere and wondering where the guy could have gone. He's never seen rot magic before, so he's totally stuck on how he's even supposed to fight back, especially since he can't even feel the guy's presence anymore. It's like he's dealing with a literal ghost. Just then, a creepy smile appears right behind him, and Azazel whispers that he's got him. He grabs Shield by the neck and looks him dead in the eye, simply telling him goodbye. Shield stares in total shock as Azazel's creepy smile reflects in his eye. He's terrified that he's about to be erased, but back at the kingdom of Helena, the sun is shining over the palace towers like nothing is wrong. Inside the palace, an order is given for everyone to clear out. A subordinate quickly replies and steps away, leaving the king of Helena sitting alone, looking completely exhausted. He tells himself the Knight Commander will probably just handle everything. But then a girl in a dark coat starts walking down the hall. She stops for a second like she heard something, and as she gets closer, the king looks up and asks why a royal magician is even there. It's Olivia Arcana, and she looks absolutely furious as she stands in the middle of the room, staring him down with a cold look. She snaps at him, saying she doesn't remember asking for an audience or being invited, so the king fires back, asking her why she's just standing there being quiet. Olivia doesn't back down and asks why he hasn't even bothered to investigate the reason Shield Rayless disappeared. Olivia starts walking away from the throne, asking the king if his plan is really just to find Shield by force. The king looks completely stressed out, yelling back that once they actually find the guy, the reason for everything will be obvious. Olivia stops and looks back with a cold stare, asking him if he really has no intention of doing a real investigation, which just makes the king snap. He shouts that she heard him right, then tells her he's exhausted and orders her to get out of his sight. He keeps screaming at her as she stays quiet, asking if she can even hear him or if she's just ignoring him. But then Olivia leans right into his space. She tells him that even as the top mage in the country, she knows Shield had a talent that was on a whole different level, making the king ask what she's even talking about. She explains that she stayed quiet for 3 years because Shield himself never said a word, but she knows the way the kingdom judged his work was totally unfair. The king starts sweating, looking pretty nervous as he asks if she's seriously trying to put the blame on him, and Olivia doesn't blink, telling him that if that's how it sounded, then that's exactly what she's doing. The king just fumes, calling her incredibly rude for talking to him like that. As Elaine stands quietly in the back, Olivia finally admits she spent the night Shield got engaged crying alone while hiding her feelings, and she's not about to let a tragedy like that happen again. Elaine stands there with her eyes closed, finally admitting out loud that she just can't keep lying to her own feelings anymore. The king is totally losing it, sweating bullets as he yells at Olivia to explain what the hell she's been talking about. Olivia makes it clear she's not sticking around to go down with a sinking ship, then drops the bombshell that she's quitting. She's done being the royal magician as of today, smashing her official watch right on the floor, which leaves the king completely floored. He leans in and demands to know if she actually knows where Shield is hiding, but Olivia doesn't seem fazed at all. She just starts walking out, telling him she found the truth easily, and that he should probably look into the mess his own men made. Olivia says her final goodbye and leaves, while the king just sits there looking confused and wondering what truth he's missing. Moving on to a different town, Olivia is already on the move and stops a local guide to ask if he has a moment. She tells him she's looking for a guy named Shield Rayless, who's supposed to be somewhere in this area, and the guy starts thinking and says the name sounds familiar, while Meryl can be seen sprinting through the background in a total rush. Amelia hears the name and completely loses her cool, demanding to know if Olivia just said the name Shield. Albert tries to calm her down and tells her to wait, but Olivia just ignores the tension and pulls out a scroll, telling them that the guy she's looking for has a handsome face just like this one. She holds up the drawing. It's a hilariously bad, muscular sketch that barely even looks like a human being, let alone Shield. Albert looks at the picture and starts sweating, telling her that as he expected, the drawing looks absolutely nothing like the real guy, but Amelia is totally into it, blushing like crazy and asking which legendary artist drew such a perfect masterpiece. Olivia just smirks, glad someone appreciates the art. Amelia goes back to her polite act and tells Olivia that if she's looking for Shield, he probably headed off toward the north. Olivia nods and says she's got it. But then Amelia's face completely drops into a look of pure disgust, and she lets out a flat huh after hearing what comes next. Olivia tells her to let a person finish their sentence, then admits with a big smile that she's going after the guy to make him her future husband. She shouts that she finally said it out loud and starts skipping away into the distance, leaving Amelia behind to just scream at the top of her lungs. Amelia throws a massive tantrum, demanding to know who that woman even was, while Albert realizes it was teleportation magic and that she's incredibly powerful. The sun shines over the town's buildings, but things aren't exactly peaceful as Amelia completely loses it. She's on the floor crying over the drawing of Shield, while Gabriel tries to figure out how to deal with the drama, eventually leaving the girl slumped over in a pile of sadness. Moving on to the outskirts of town, birds fly off into the sky as someone can be heard breathing heavily. Turns out it's Aza's, and he's in way over his head. He stands before a massive A-rank beast with giant fangs, realizing he's not nearly strong enough to take this thing on. He looks totally desperate, thinking about how the life shield once saved for him is finally going to end right here in the dirt. The monster doesn't wait around and lands a brutal hit, sending Azaz flying back as he groans from the impact. But just before the beast can finish him, Amelia drops in from nowhere. She moves like a blur, landing a heavy strike that cuts right through the monster and saves his life. Azaz looks up at her with his heart racing, managed to choke out a quick thanks for the help. The mood shifts instantly when Amelia grabs him by the neck. Her eyes go dark as she demands to know if he just mentioned the name Shield. Azaz is terrified as she shoves that muscular, weird drawing in his face, asking him if the Shield he knows is the same guy from her masterpiece. Azaz looks at the drawing and admits it's a little off, but might actually be the guy, so Olivia immediately demands to know where he is. Azaz looks a bit sweat-dropped and tells her that Shield already left for the Lord's Manor in Marray. Olivia hits the ground in total despair, yelling about how it's happening again while Azaz just stands there asking if she's alright. She starts crying her eyes out, complaining that she's already chased him through Again, Iliad, and Minant, but every single trip turned out to be a total failure. Azaz tries to calm her down with a shaky smile, suggesting they should probably just go grab some food since he's paying for everything. Olivia gives in and says okay, leaning against him while she tries to pull herself together. As they start walking away, Azaz asks if there's anything she likes to eat, but Olivia just bluntly says Shield's name. Azaz has to clarify he was talking about food, and it turns out, Olivia finally catching up to Shield was a story for much later. Moving back to the action, a hand reaches out and triggers a magic reflection barrier that flashes with intense energy. Gabriel looks completely shocked by what's happening, gritting her teeth as she realizes things are taking a turn. Azazel skids back across the dirt, gritting his teeth from the impact. The reflected force really caught him off guard, leaving him completely stunned. He stares at the barrier, wondering what kind of crazy magic this actually is since it looks so basic, but Bahamut just gives him a smug look. She smiles and reminds him that she already warned him about how dangerous this guy was, and she goes on to explain that Shield's barrier is insanely tough. It doesn't just block things, it sends any magic thrown at it right back. So Gabriel stomps her foot down, deciding she's heard enough. She says if that's the case, she'll just have to try something else, but Shield just waves her off with a casual smile. He tells her that sitting there trying to analyze his moves isn't going to change the outcome at all, and that's when things get intense. Azazel lunges in, thinking he has to finish this before anyone notices, while Gabriel prepares her decay magic to end it, and she lets the spell rip. A massive explosion of dark energy tears through the air, heading straight for Shield's position until Azazel suddenly jumps right in the way. He takes the full force of the decay magic to protect Shield, standing there as the spell burns into his back, which actually makes Shield look pretty worried. He looks down at his hands and tells Azazel that he should really start taking better care of himself. Faye steps in with a serious look, telling everyone to just drop it and stop right there, but Shield just looks at her, sounding pretty confused about why she's suddenly calling the shots, while Azazel stays stubborn, insisting that his torn-up arm and wing aren't a big deal since they'll grow back in a week, and that completely blows Shield's mind. He yells about how crazy it is to regenerate that fast, thinking that's way more impressive than his own magic. So Gabriel turns to Faye and asks if all humans are walking around with this level of power now, though Faye clarifies that Shield is definitely the only one. Azazel goes quiet for a second as he thinks it over, eventually saying he finally understands what Faye is actually planning, and he asks if the plan is to wait 100 years until Shield is dead to start the real fight. Faye just smiles, impressed he figured out the long game so quickly. quickly, but S.H.I.E.L.D. starts absolutely losing it. He realizes that if Faye inherits his barrier magic after he's gone, the future of humanity is basically over, and he starts crying while apologizing to people who haven't even been born yet. Faye ignores his breakdown and invites Azazel to come stay with them at Marray, suggesting they spend the next 100 years just training and having fun, which actually work. Azazel bows and says he's down, but he's got a few loose ends to tie up before he joins them. Azazel lets out a sharp grunt, clearly still feeling the sting from his injuries as he prepares to head out, and S.H.I.E.L.D. is caught totally off guard when a massive swarm of black bats suddenly starts swirling around the group. Azazel just tells them he's heading off for now, slowly vanishing into the thick cloud of wings as he makes his exit, and S.H.I.E.L.D. is left looking completely starstruck by how cool it all was, though Faye points out the guy is actually super smart and will be a massive asset if they play their cards right. S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't see it that way at all, losing his mind and asking Faye if she's seriously going to make someone that terrifying one of their teammates. Faye shrugs it off, mentioning that while he's definitely got the muscle to help them out, his real value isn't just about how hard he can hit, but the insane amount of pressure he puts on people, noting how he can make anyone shake with fear until they follow orders, and that his lifetime body count is likely way higher than hers. That sends a chill down S.H.I.E.L.D.'s spine, as he realizes she's probably talking about all the traitors the guy has personally dealt with, so he starts crying and yelling that there's no way he can handle this, while Faye just stands there trying to get him to pipe down. Faye crosses her arms with a smug look, explaining that once a guy like that swears loyalty he never flips, then asks S.H.I.E.L.D. if he's actually just that confident in his own barrier skill. S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't really have a comeback for that. He just stands there looking pretty stressed out with a sweat drop rolling down his face. He eventually caves and admits she's probably right about the whole thing, though he still looks a little unsure about the plan, but Faye is already over it, telling him they need to go report in and grab their reward, while S.H.I.E.L.D. struggles to keep up with her fast pace. As they clear the tree line, Faye looks out at the massive city in the distance and asks if they're finally at Marray, while S.H.I.E.L.D. stretches his arms and complains about what a nightmare the trip was, especially with everyone acting suspicious and demanding proof about Azazel. Faye just tells him to get over it since everything worked out, pointing out that the city is right there in front of them anyway. S.H.I.E.L.D. loses it and yells that it's a literal miracle they didn't starve on the way, but Faye just shuts him down and tells him to walk faster because her stomach is growling. He just sighs and mutters about how she never listened. But as they get closer to the gate, S.H.I.E.L.D.'s jaw drops as he gets a good look at the place, shouting that Marray is actually way more impressive than he ever expected. Faye looks out at the massive city spread out below them. It's huge, filled with white stone buildings and red roofs that go on forever. As they walk, S.H.I.E.L.D. looks down at his boots hitting the pavement and wonders if all of this actually belongs to him now. The two of them stop right in front of a giant mansion, and S.H.I.E.L.D. figures this has to be the place. S.H.I.E.L.D. walks up to the entrance and calls out to the guard standing there, explaining that he was told showing this bracelet would let him through, which leaves the guard looking completely shocked. S.H.I.E.L.D. puts on a big heroic grin and introduces himself, telling the guy he's the new lord of the area, S.H.I.E.L.D. Raylith. He leans over to whisper and ask Faye if he looked cool just then, but she just shuts him down and says not even a little bit. The guards don't seem to mind though. They bow down low and tell the new lord they've been waiting for him, inviting him to head inside. S.H.I.E.L.D. starts getting ahead of himself, blushing as he wonders if a golden carriage is going to come pick them up, but Faye just looks at him like he's crazy, though as they walk onto the grounds, S.H.I.E.L.D. freezes up. Everyone working there is wearing these weird black masks over their eyes. S.H.I.E.L.D. and Faye head deeper into the estate, but everywhere they look, the staff is wearing those creepy black masks. One of the workers spots them and whispers to the others that the new lord has finally shown up. A masked guy opens the main doors and tells them to follow him since someone is already waiting for them, making S.H.I.E.L.D. pretty nervous. The guard leads them through a massive, fancy hallway that looks way too big for just one person. He stops in the middle of the room and tells them to wait right there, but S.H.I.E.L.D. can't help feeling like they aren't actually welcome here. He mentions he's been getting nothing but cold stares from the staff, especially with the masked maids whispering about them in the corner. Faye doesn't seem to care though. She just says if these people try to kick them out, she'll just get rid of everyone herself. S.H.I.E.L.D. gets all sparkly-eyed hearing that, thinking about how lucky he is to have someone so reliable on his side. But then he stops and looks around, wondering who it is they're even supposed to be meeting in a place like this. Right then, the doors swing open and an older guy with a cane walks in with two huge bodyguards right behind him. The doors fly open and an old guy with a cane walks in with two massive guards. S.H.I.E.L.D. and Faye just stand there waiting to see what this guy wants. He's got this smug look on his face while he welcomes them, calling them the folks from the Helena Kingdom. His eyes get all sharp as he explains that Gabriel gave him the full rundown, and he introduces himself as Vengatsuo. S.H.I.E.L.D. gets a bit tense hearing himself called a person from Helena. It's like he knows this guy is already judging. Vengatsuo stands his ground ground and lets them know he's been the one running this whole territory since the previous lord's era. Then he lets out a little smirk, mentioning how he heard the new boss is nothing more than a commoner. He shoves his cane right in Shield's face and tells him it's better for everyone if things just keep running exactly like they have been. Faye looks over at Shield and asks if she should just report this to Gabriel. She looks like she's about 2 seconds away from losing it, but Shield just gives her a look and says he doesn't need help because he's going to take back control of his land himself, proving that he's not going to let some old guy push him around in his own home. Shield stares the old man down, asking if he's really expected to just be some puppet lord while Vengatsuo keeps all the actual power for himself. But the old guy doesn't even blink, just telling Shield he can interpret the situation however he wants while his guards stand ready. Shield gets a bit of a cold sweat, realizing this power struggle is going to be a lot more annoying and time-consuming than he thought. Suddenly, the doors are blown wide open. Azazel shows up with a whole squad of demons behind him, looking completely ready for a fight. Vengatsuo completely loses it, yelling in shock because he has no idea who these people are or how they got in. But the demons ignore him and kneel, with Azazel telling Faye they've come to free their people and serve Shield for the next 100 years. Faye just gives a little smile and says that's good, acting like it's totally normal to have a demon commander kissing her hand in the middle of a meeting. The old manager is absolutely fuming now, screaming about how anyone could be so disrespectful to a man of his standing. He doesn't wait another second, barking out an order for his guards to charge in and take them out. Azazel just stands his ground and lets out a massive wave of dark energy, instantly wrecking the guards before they can even get close. Azazel stares them down with these cold, sharp eyes, telling them straight up they're just an eyesore at this point. The vibe in the room shifts instantly as Vengatsuo and his guy just freeze up, completely paralyzed by the pressure. One of the guards is already a total mess, crying and bleeding as he realizes just how deep of a hole they've dug. Vengatsuo hasn't caught on yet, just losing his mind and screaming at the demons to explain what they think they're doing. He looks over at his guard with total disgust, calling the guy a pathetic loser for folding so easily. That's when Beluga steps forward and looks over at her boss, Azazel, waiting for the green light to handle things. She says she's going to get rid of the trash, and Azazel just gives her the okay to go ahead and do her thing. She stands there looking cold as ice, sword out and ready to end this whole situation in a second. The guard starts losing it, crying and begging for them to at least spare his life while he still can. But Beluga just looks down at him, telling him he should have known that leaving loose ends always leads to a bigger headache later. Beluga stares the guy down with her sword ready, telling him he doesn't need to worry about remembering anything, since he won't have a brain left to do it. She moves like a blur, finishing the job so fast that Vengatsuo can only stand there and watch the room get trashed. Vengatsuo completely loses it, screaming about how he's going to bring the entire army down on them, but someone just tells him to shut his mouth. Shield reaches out and hits him with a massive blast, shattering his staff and knocking the guy back like he's nothing. Shield starts panicking, telling the demons to hold on because if they keep going like this, everyone's going to think he's running some kind of scary dictatorship. Beluga stops and looks back at him, acknowledging him as her lord while he tries to get his head around the mess. Vengatsuo is left on the ground in a pool of blood, crying and totally broken as Beluga just walks away from the carnage. She kneels before Shield and explains that demons are just naturally sensitive to people wanting to kill them, so there's no room for anyone who doesn't know their place. Shield looks away with a sweat drop, admitting she's got a point. Even if the way she handles things is way too intense for him, he decides to move things along, asking Beluga what the deal is with the rest of the people in the territory who might be holding a grudge. Beluga stands in the middle of the room with her sword dripping blood, calmly saying she already handled the problem, making it clear she didn't waste any time at all. She looks over her shoulder and gives the order to bring the others in, and the survivors shout back in a panic as they're led forward. The group is a mess, with some of them crying while they fall to their knees. Beluga looks them over and tells Shield that out of everyone in the estate, these 5 are the only ones who don't actually want him dead. Shield completely loses his mind when he hears that, screaming about how small the group is and asking if she seriously took out everyone else. But Beluga just ignores the drama and lists them off. It's just 2 gatekeepers, a cook, and 1 new maid left standing. Shield looks down at the new maid and realizes she's just a young girl, which makes him feel even worse about the whole situation. He steps up and tries to fix the vibe, telling the group that if they keep working like normal, he's going to double their pay. The survivors can't believe their luck, but Shield adds 1 major cat. He looks them in the eyes and says they have to keep everything that happened today a total secret, and the cook starts bawling with joy, yelling about how Shield is the best lord ever for being so generous. The cook and the guard are losing it with relief. The guard yells out a huge thank you and swears he'll never say a word about what happened today, while Shield just stands there with a small smile, feeling pretty good about how things are turning out. He lets out a quiet laugh to himself, but then his face totally changes when he notices something weird. He looks over at the young girl standing with with the survivors and realizes she's giving him the most intense, scary look he's ever seen. He thinks to himself that she definitely doesn't look like any normal maid, and he steps closer to get a better look while Faye just watches from the background. The girl is kneeling on the floor, but she doesn't look scared. She looks like she wants him dead, making S.H.I.E.L.D. wonder who she could possibly be. Her eyes are dark and full of rage, and everyone stands around in the middle of the empty hall. It's a heavy scene. S.H.I.E.L.D. notices something even more upsetting. Despite that tough look on her face, the girl's hands are shaking like crazy. He figures she might be some secret kid of the last lord. And then Beluga pipes up to explain that the old manager had her locked in a cell this whole time. S.H.I.E.L.D. immediately moves in to help, telling her he's going to untie her ropes. The girl just gasps as he starts freeing her from the bind. As the ropes fall away, the girl lets out a pained gasp. S.H.I.E.L.D. looks down and notices her feet are covered in nasty bruises, wondering how she got so hurt. S.H.I.E.L.D. leans in and asks what happened to her, checking if she's injured anywhere else. He just wants to make sure she's actually okay. The girl suddenly snaps and tries to pull away from him. She screams for him to stop and just let her go. As she moves, her clothes shift and show the truth. Her entire back is covered in deep scars and dark, painful-looking marks. S.H.I.E.L.D. looks completely sickened by what he's seen. He can't even wrap his head around someone doing this to a kid. The girl grits her teeth and hides her face, clearly feeling humiliated. She yells at him to stop looking at her. She breaks down into tears, asking if the shame she's felt today isn't enough. She tells him that if he's just going to lock her back up to suffer, he should just kill her and get it over with. Beluga watches the girl's outburst with a totally blank look. She casually asks S.H.I.E.L.D. if she should just go ahead and finish the kid off. S.H.I.E.L.D. immediately tells her to knock it off, taking the blame for the situation. He admits he was being insensitive by prying into her trauma. He watches the girl sob and feels a heavy weight in his chest. It's clear her life has been so miserable that dying sounds better to her, and he realizes just how cruel this world has been to her. S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't waste a second, shouting for someone to get the girl treated and taken care of immediately. The girl just stares at him while crying. She's completely thrown off, asking why he's even helping her when she can't even process what's happening. She asks him to repeat himself because she just can't believe her ears, so S.H.I.E.L.D. just looks at her and asks if this isn't exactly what any normal human being would do for someone else. The girl looks up at him with big, watery eyes, still sounding pretty scared as she asks if he's really not going to kill her, or worse, make her a slave. S.H.I.E.L.D. reaches out his hand to her, promising one more time that he's not going to do any of that, and then he asks if she's ready to get up off the floor. She looks at his hand for a second before her small, bruised fingers finally reach out and take it. She lets out a tiny, quiet apology for how she acted earlier and realizes she skipped the most important part. She looks down at the ground, telling him that before anything else, she really should have thanked him. The girl pulls herself together a bit and introduces herself as Lumi's Marray, telling S.H.I.E.L.D. she's actually really grateful that he stepped in to save her life. S.H.I.E.L.D. just stands there with a bit of a nervous smile, thinking to himself that even after everything she's been through, she still carries herself like a proper noble. But then her expression shifts as she speaks up again. She tells him she gets it now. He's nothing like that Vengatsubo guy, and that's all she really needed to know. But even with all that fear, Lumi finds a sudden spark of strength, because she looks S.H.I.E.L.D. right in the eyes and yells that she won't let some demons just take over this land. It's the territory her father spent his entire life building and protecting, so with tears still streaming down her face, she makes a vow to keep everyone she cares about safe. In the next scene, a memory of a much younger S.H.I.E.L.D. flashes back to a sunny day in the woods where he cheers about finally getting something right and shows off a glowing barrier he put around a bird's nest, asking if the little guys are safe now. The old manager Vengatsubo watches from the side and calls out to him, making S.H.I.E.L.D. turn around to see what he wants. Vengatsubo tells him that the magic he's using is pretty strange, which just makes the kid wonder what's so weird about it. The old man explains that he's seen every kind of spell there is, but S.H.I.E.L.D.'s power is unlike anything else. S.H.I.E.L.D. just looks confused and asks if this isn't just basic barrier magic, but right then a snake lunges at the nest and hits the glowing S.H.I.E.L.D. like a wall. The snake gets wrecked against the invisible wall, while Vengatsubo admits that even he can't really explain how the kid is doing it. Vengatsubo looks down at the kid and asks why he's so focused on this power when there are way cooler types of attack magic he could learn, but S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't even hesitate. He just looks back and repeats the question, thinking about why he chose this path, and with a big grin, he says it's obviously because he wants to protect the things that matter most to him. It's a complete contrast to Lumi's, who's currently standing there beaten and covered in dirt, so S.H.I.E.L.D. just smiles to himself in the present, taking in her resolve and saying he gets it now. He looks her right in the eyes and says she clearly has something worth protecting, which makes Lumi snap back and ask what his point is. S.H.I.E.L.D. snaps his fingers, sparks of energy flying, as he tells her he's going to teach her magic, so she can get strong enough to take this town back from him, though he stops for a second to add one specific condition that leaves her looking completely stunned. He gives her a smug look and tells her the only thing he's going to teach her is barrier magic, nothing else. Lumi loses it and yells back, unable to believe he's only offering to teach her defensive spells. She ends up crying into Amelia's arms, sobbing about how totally unfair the whole situation is. Shield gives a cheerful wave as he heads out, leaving Lumi's watching him from the stairs. But even as he goes, he hopes that the barrier magic he's teaching her will actually be enough to save her one day. Behind him, Lumi's is still having a total meltdown, yelling for him to wait while Amelia tries to keep her calm. It's not long before S.H.I.E.L.D. meets up with Exile and the rest of the demon crew. Everyone's looking pretty serious, but S.H.I.E.L.D. just keeps that confident smirk on his face and gets straight to the point, asking Azazel what he thinks their first move should be. Azazel suggests they start by dealing with the parting gift the previous lord left behind, which makes S.H.I.E.L.D. stop and ask what he's getting at. So the group heads out to the edge of town, where everything is a total mess. Looking at the piles of rubble and the rushing water, S.H.I.E.L.D. finally realizes why this place hasn't grown in years. He watches the water surge past and points out that the town would be totally underwater without dike, making it clear that fixing the water management is the absolute first thing on the list, even though Azazel reminds him that these kinds of projects are massive money pit. That's exactly why the last guy in charge just let everything fall apart, as S.H.I.E.L.D. isn't having it. He says if they don't fix the source of the problem, they'll just be stuck doing endless repairs and never actually get anywhere. Azazel just looks at the stagnant puddles and concludes that the previous rulers simply didn't care enough about the people to spend the money. The tension in the air is thick enough to see someone sweating bullets as the reality of the situation hits, and as S.H.I.E.L.D. and his crew stand before the townspeople, one of the workers steps forward to ask if he's really the new Lord S.H.I.E.L.D. Raylet. The lead manager looks down his nose at the group, acting all smug while he notes that they must be the new people in charge. Near the back, an old man holds a kid close, looking totally terrified while he wonders why the new lord would ever be traveling with demons. Amelia whispers that showing up with a bunch of demons was obviously going to put everyone on edge, so S.H.I.E.L.D. tells everyone to just take a step back and stay calm. He tries to apologize for the scary entrance, saying he didn't mean to be aggressive, but the manager just laughs in his face and calls him a liar. Amelia just stares at him. She looks completely over this guy's attitude already as S.H.I.E.L.D. puts his hands up to show he's not a threat, telling the whole crowd that he didn't come for a fight. He just wants to fix the water. The manager starts losing his mind. He knows that if the water issues actually get fixed, his little tax stealing scheme is totally over. He starts yelling at the crowd, desperately trying to convince them that the new lord is just feeding them a bunch of lies to trick them. The manager is starting to sweat bullets, realizing his grip on the town is slipping away even if the water stays broken, and as one of his guys screams for his brother, Beluga steps in and slices the manager down with a dark blade before he can even react. The subordinate loses it, crying and yelling about how she'll pay for what she did to his brother as he swings his weapon wildly, but Beluga doesn't even blink. She counters the guy's desperate attack in a split second, dropping him right where he stands. She stands there with dark energy swirling around her, calmly telling the rest of the crowd that if anyone else has a problem, they're welcome to step forward. S.H.I.E.L.D. watches the whole thing with a nervous look on his face. He thinks to himself that her power is absolutely terrifying, and he never wants to be her enemy. Looking out at the crowd, the townspeople are huddled together and shaking, completely petrified by the display of force they just saw. S.H.I.E.L.D. tells Beluga to knock it off, explaining that he's not trying to run this place by scaring everyone into submission, so he decides that instead of just talking and making promises, it would be a whole lot better to just show them what he can actually do. The workers wonder what he's planning to show them, just as S.H.I.E.L.D. holds his hands out toward the wreckage and starts putting his magic to work. The old manager gasps in total shock as he watches S.H.I.E.L.D.'s power unfold right in front of him, and S.H.I.E.L.D. throws his arms wide, calling up a massive grid-like magic barrier that stretches out across the entire sky. The old man is actually moved to tears by the sight, saying he can't believe how incredible the magic is, but S.H.I.E.L.D. just gives a confident smirk over his shoulder and tells everyone that his work should last at least 3 years, though the townspeople aren't so sure. They start complaining that the barrier looks way too thin and call him a liar. S.H.I.E.L.D. just laughs at their doubt and tells them it's fine, suggesting that they should just try to break it if they're so worried. The crowd stands there looking completely confused, wondering what he means by trying it out, until an announcer on a stage yells out to the massive crowd, asking if everyone is ready to get things moving. He shouts at the top of his lungs that they're officially starting the Lord's Cup Barrier Destruction Contest, and tells the rowdy crowd that the rules for this whole event are going to be super simple for everyone to follow. The dark-haired royal magician smiles and tells the crowd that the Lord set up the barrier just for them, adding that the person who manages to deal the most damage to it is going to walk away as the winner. The announcer's voice booms over the crowd, teasing everyone by saying there's a very special prize waiting for whoever takes the top spot, and he shows off a set of high-end armor, explaining its special gear infused with the Lord's barrier magic that comes with a guaranteed high-ranking position in the regular army. In the crowd, a woman mentions hearing about the barrier being cast, though the guy standing next to her thinks it's all a joke and doesn't get why everyone is making such a big deal over some basic magic. Another person quickly corrects him, saying this isn't just any old spell, and is actually the same legendary barrier they used to protect the kingdom of Helena, which gets a skeptical look from Azazel, who stands nearby with shield and mutters that the whole thing is probably just a cheap fake. But the announcer cuts through the chatter by shouting into his mic for everyone to quiet down, raising his hand to get the event moving. He tells the participants they have 10 minutes to hit the barrier with everything they got, then tells them to get into their positions as he gives the signal. With a loud shout to start the contest, a group of adventurers charges forward with their weapons and magic ready to go, and the crowd watches in awe as the fighters throw themselves into the task with some serious intensity. The announcer hypes up the crowd, pointing out that all the top-tier adventurers in town are getting in on the action, and everyone watching starts going wild as they see the heavy hitters start unloading their best moves. A girl in the stands is clearly feeling confident, shouting out that this whole thing is going to be a total breeze, but the royal magician just gives a little smirk, laughing to herself while she says she really wonders about that. Suddenly, someone in the crowd spots something and yells for everyone to look over at the barrier, and a girl nearby just stares in shock, barely able to find her words as she sees what's actually happening to the magic. Despite the weird vibe, the rest of the fans keep screaming their heads off, telling the fighters they've still got time to pull this off. One of the blonde adventurers stops in his track, looking completely stunned because there isn't even a single scratch on the target. With the clock ticking down, the announcer shouts out that there are only 5 seconds left, pushing the fighters to throw everything they have into one last desperate attack before the whistle blows, and the contest is officially over. The dark-haired adventurer looks down in total defeat, realizing that despite all their efforts, nothing on the barrier has changed. The blonde swordsman holds his blade up, pointing out how the target is still perfectly clean and wondering if anyone actually won, while the announcer calls for the Lord to start the scoring. Shield jumps down from the stands like it's no big deal, landing casually before waving his hand and saying he'll be the one to check things out. He walks up to the glowing hexagonal barrier, looking closely at the surface to see if anyone managed to leave a mark. He looks pretty impressed, pointing out that one specific guy's attack actually managed to do the most damage out of everyone, leading the announcer to step back up to the microphone and tell the crowd he's finally ready to name the winner. The whole place goes quiet for a second as he starts to announce the name, shouting out that contestant number 24 takes the prize. A big dude with a mustache starts celebrating while everyone around him goes crazy with cheers. Shield claps along, yelling out his congratulations to the guy, all while the royal magician watches from the back. Lumi looks pretty serious, asking Shield what the point of the whole contest was if nobody could even scratch his barrier, while he just stands there acting confused. Shield explains that the whole thing was actually a way to see how strong the locals are, and since Beluga is starting to recruit soldiers, the info will be a huge help. He flashes her a big grin and says that comrades are supposed to help each other out, which leaves Lumi's looking away and quietly repeating the word to herself. Shield starts teasing her, asking if she finally changed her mind about him being a totally useless guy who can't get anything done, before he starts fake crying, asking what kind of bad image she actually had of him in her head this whole time. Lumi stays quiet for a second, then she looks off to the side with a bit of a blush, admitting she might have gained just a tiny bit of respect for him. Shield totally misses it and asks if she said something, but she just puts her poker face back on and tells him it was nothing. Just then, Azazel comes flying in from a distance calling out for his lord, and Shield turns around to see what the big deal is. Azazel looks a little stressed as he breaks the news that they've got a guest waiting back at the estate. Shield looks pretty surprised by the news, repeating the word guest, like he can't quite believe someone actually showed up. Azazel just kind of brushes it off at first, so Shield asks if maybe Gabriel is the one who came all the way out here to see him. But Azazel starts sweating and looks super stressed, telling him that actually, it's not Gabriel at all, and it sounds like The news is even worse than he thought. Shield clicks his tongue and looks completely annoyed, saying this has turned into a huge pain while Lumi watches him closely. They finally make it back to the estate, where a couple of maids are waiting at the door to bow and welcome their lord home, but he doesn't have time to relax. As he and Lumi walk through the halls, he wonders if this visitor is already tracking them, and figures it has to be Olivia since he heard the person was strong. He keeps talking about how this person is supposed to be the strongest royal magician around, just as the maid leads them to a set of double doors and tells them the guest is inside. The vibe in the hallway gets heavy. Shield stares at the door, thinking he really needs to be ready for whatever's on the other side, and he just bursts right in. He yells out asking if it's really Olivia, just as the person sitting inside sets their mug down on the table with a loud thud. Turns out he was totally wrong. A huge, bald guy with a nasty grin looks up and tells Shield that, unfortunately for him, he's face to face with Lord Gamma. Shield is sweating and can't believe who's sitting there, asking why he showed up. Lumi looks totally disappointed, saying she expected a cute girl, but just got some bald guy instead, but Gamag isn't having it. He stands his ground in the middle of the room and tells Shield that he's actually the one who wants some answers about what's going on, and he gets this smug look on his face. He asks Shield if he really thought a top-tier royal magician like himself wouldn't eventually track him down here. Gamag makes it clear he's there to drag a loser like Shield back home where he belongs. Shield just stands there looking confused, repeating the words back like he can't believe the nerve of these guys. Gamag explains it's a direct order from that knight commander who loves playing politics, but Shield asks why they even care now since they're the ones who kicked him out. The big guy just shrugs it off. He says that personally, he doesn't think the kingdom of Helena really needs that magic barrier to survive, but it turns out the people running things at the very top don't see it that way. They decided the barrier is actually a big deal and they need it back immediately. Shield realizes that only the king has enough power to tell the knight commander what to do. He starts wondering if the king was actually left out of the loop when he was first exiled, but honestly he doesn't care about the drama. He holds his hand out and tells Gamag straight up that he isn't going back to Helena, and if he tries to make him, things are going to get ugly. Gamag just lets out a nasty laugh. He looks Shield right in the eye and asks him if he's really serious about trying to start a fight with someone like him.